Chapter 1 of The Adventures of Tommy Blake. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Therese. The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan, CSC. Chapter 1. The Flight. Astor Street, number 429. Here is the place, madam. The cab came to an abrupt stop in front of a very small, one-story cottage, packed suffocatingly between two houses much larger but every bit as dirty. It was evident that this was now a very poor quarter of the city, though some of the dwellings seemed still to indicate that at one time they had been the homes of well-to-do citizens. "I'm sorry I have no tip for you, my good man," said Mrs. Blake, as the driver set down three very heavy suitcases upon the floor of what should be called the reception room. "That's perfectly all right. I'm paid a salary. I hope you'll like your new home." Bowing his head in a friendly fashion, the driver departed, leaving Mrs. Blake and Tommy to their thoughts. "This is certainly nothing like you have been used to, dear, but we will have to make it do at present." "Don't worry about me, Mother. I can stand it if you can." "You're a dear, Tommy." "How far away are we from Dad?" "About 100 miles." "He'll never come here, will he?" "No, not here." It was evident from Mrs. Blake's voice that she didn't feel any too certain that Thomas Blake Sr. would not find them. 14 years before, in spite of all warnings, Louise Bowman, a lovely Catholic girl, had married Thomas Blake, a wealthy atheist. Louise always said she was not marrying Tom for his money, but because she loved him. And she would add, as a sort of soothing syrup for her rather guilty conscience, "I know he'll come over after we are married." But for 14 years there had been no sign of conversion on Tom's part. Indeed, quite to the contrary. It was only because of the overwrought nerves of the mother that he had permitted Tommy to be baptized a Catholic. When it came time for the boy to go to school, another scene occurred. And not until Louise Blake took the child and returned to her mother's house, declaring that, unless he were educated as a Catholic, she would remain there in spite of gossip, did her husband yield. Things were never the same after that in the Blake household. Externally, life went on as usual, but Tom found more and more reasons for being away from home. His invariable claim was that business called him elsewhere. And to add to Louise's difficulties, her mother was now dead, so there was no place where she could go for comfort. "Louise, I must go to Florida in the morning. It would bore you to go along. Business, you know." "Can't you get someone else to go?" "No, Louise. I've found no one who can carry on my business for me." "How long will you be away, Tom?" "About a month, I believe." "A month?" gasped his wife. "Yes, a month." As Mrs. Blake went about inspecting the little four-room house that was now to be her and Tommy's home, her memory was busy with scenes like these. There had been many of them. Finally the break had come. For more than a year the wife had lived the life of a martyr. She could stand it no longer. In name only could she continue to be the wife of Tom Blake. She would take the boy, and what belongings they could carry, and quietly leave their house for some strange town at a distance. She had about $150 in cash. That would take her and Tommy far enough away and pay their rent and meals until she herself could begin earning. And so it came about that they were beginning their new life in this small, shabby house. Young Tom Blake was the picture of his mother. He was now 12 years old and ready to enter a junior high school. There was a very exclusive one in the city of his birth, and his father had declared that he must go to it in September. That had been one of his mother's chief worries before they left. Of course Tom missed his father. Dad had always treated him so well, had given him everything he wished. Moreover, the boy was not quite old enough to realize fully the great principles for which his mother had fought so long, and for which he deemed it proper to leave all the material comforts of a fine home, to earn her living and his. "This will be your room, Tom, and this will be Mother's. We'll have a combination dining room and kitchen, and the other room will have to be living room, parlor, and everything else. The furniture is not nearly so bad as I thought it would be. We'll improve on it from time to time. Now we must go out for a little lunch and then get to bed. It is getting very late." So out into the darkness of the night the two went in search of a place where they could get something to eat. The houses on either side seemed almost tenantless, if one could judge by the absence of lights in them. At the turn of a corner they came upon a few stores, in whose fly-specked windows yellowish lights cast their beams, upon gaudy coloured dresses in one window, upon dingy-looking canned goods in the second, and upon scraggy pot plants in a third. The eyes of both mother and son were surveying these things, when out of the latter doorway came a man and a woman. "Coffee was rotten tonight, Jack. Let's see if we can't find another joint tomorrow. What you say?" "Suits me, kid. So long as we're paying for it, we might as well get." The remainder of the sentence did not reach the ears of Mrs. Blake. "Here's a place, Tom. Let's go in." So into the place whose coffee had been the theme of the two previous customers' remarks went Mrs. Blake and Tommy. The eating room was small and contained nothing but a lunch counter, 3 high stools, and a number of gaudy advertisements of such things as cigarettes and soft drinks. Behind the counter was a door which apparently gave entrance to a kitchen. It was now almost entirely blocked by the huge body of a woman in the act of retreating with an armful of dirty dishes. She turned when she heard the Blakes enter. "Evening, madam," grinned the woman in the doorway, and before Mrs. Blake could answer, she added, "Strangers, ain't ya? I'll be back in a minute." Mrs. Blake sat upon one of the stools and Tom upon another. The oilcloth on the counter had long since served its time, but where it still stretched in unbroken patches its surface was greasy from lack of hot water and soap. "Now what can I do for ya?" came from the door, and a moment later the same huge woman entered, wiping her hands on her dirty apron. "Mother'd like something to eat, and so would I," spoke up Tommy before his mother found words. "So you would," rejoined the waitress, her toothless mouth stretched in a cavernous grin. "Well, I have some nice coffee, some very nice sandwiches, strictly fresh eggs, and some delicious apple pie." So saying, she planted her plump hands upon her hips, threw back her head, and waited in heavy silence for the response to her sparkling adjectives. But it was hard for her to wait, and just as hard for Mrs. Blake to speak, because the surroundings so belied the promised menu. "Folks that just left are 2 of my best patrons. You're new here, ain't ya? I never seen such well-dressed folks in these parts." Then words came to Mrs. Blake. She was afraid questions might be asked which she would not care to answer, so she broke in upon the monologue. "Bring us 2 egg sandwiches, 2 cups of coffee, and 2 pieces of apple pie, please." At that the cook moved toward her kitchen, but turned again, stooping under the counter, and drawing forth an evening paper, placed it before Mrs. Blake. "See the news while I'm gone, missus." There was only one part of the paper that interested Louise that night, a part that had never interested her before, the classified ones. She scanned them hurriedly but accurately, fearing the while that she might be caught looking in that section. She still had the pride of family in her veins. Suddenly her eyes fell upon an advertisement for a clerk in a ladies' furnishings department. Making a hasty effort to pull one of her calling cards from the pack in her pocketbook, she tore the pasteboard in 2. She pulled out another, jotted down the address, slipped the card and pencil back into her purse, and was just reaching for the torn pieces which she had pushed aside, when the waitress entered with 2 large, heavy mugs of coffee. "Don't bother about them pieces, missus. Just throw them down here on the floor." And before Louise quite knew what was happening, the woman took the cardboard fragments from her fingers and tossed them under the counter. "Some cups they have here, Mother, aren't they?" "Yes, buddy, them's real mugs." And a moment later the waitress cook was before them with 2 glasses of water. "You see, it's mostly working men that come in here. They don't want no china." As she concluded her explanation, she gave Tommy a friendly pat on the arm. "I'll get your sandwiches now, folks. I'm sure they are ready." As the woman disappeared, Mrs. Blake took a sip of the coffee, which she found to be not quite so bad as she had feared. When the sandwiches arrived, Tommy fell upon his with some relish. He was young and hungry. But how different was tonight's lunch from last night's dinner! "What do you think of the coffee, ma'am? Folks say Katie Brown's good at it." "It's good, Mrs. Brown," Louise replied, only wishing that the mugs were a bit cleaner. Soon the lunch was over, and the two went back through the deserted, dimly lighted streets to the little cottage. "Tommy, I know you don't fully realize what this is all about. I don't want you to think less of your daddy than you did. I want you to pray to St. Joseph for him. If we had stayed on with him, you would have been put into that school Daddy spoke about, and you would undoubtedly have lost your faith and possibly your morals, and that I could never stand for. You don't, and never will, know all Mother has gone through, but—" Here Mrs. Blake began to lose control of her nerves and voice, for she thought it best to let matters stand for the present. "Let's go to bed now. It's quite late and you are very tired after that long ride today. Tomorrow we can talk and plan." With that she went into Tom's bedroom and threw back the covers for him. Out of one of the suitcases she drew his night clothes and spread them upon his bed. A small metal statue of St. Joseph, given her by a sister in her college days, was placed upon a little table. Then the two knelt and together said their night prayers. At the moment it seemed as though this were the sole part of the past that had not changed, for even though that past was so near, the events of this day had borne no resemblance to it. While they thus knelt in prayer, Katie Brown, in her dingy restaurant, was piecing together the parts of the calling card she had been so careful to obtain from her new caller, although at the time she had seemed indifferent to it. When she succeeded in patching it together, she read it to herself: Mrs. Thomas Blake, 3965 Milton Boulevard, New York. To Katie, at that moment, the name on the card was only a name. She was satisfied to know who it was that had called at her place, dressed so much better than anyone else who had entered for months. For her restaurant was only a cheap coffee house, kept mainly for the convenience of the neighborhood factory employees. After she had read the card, Katie's first impulse was to destroy it. But on second thought she placed it upon a shelf at the rear of the counter and proceeded to clean up her place for the night. At 3965 Milton Boulevard, New York, a different scene was being enacted. When the maid, who had been given the half day off, returned to the Blake mansion late that night and found the place empty, she at once knew that something unusual had happened. Never had Mrs. Blake been absent without leaving a note of explanation. The maid, Alice Clark, was a fine elderly Catholic woman with whom Louise had shared many of her trials and sorrows, and on whose broad bosom she had often cried when she could no longer bear her anguish. Where was her mistress tonight? This was what Alice was asking herself as the great hall clock struck 11. And what was she herself to do? Finally, what would stubborn Tom Blake do when he got back home that night or the following morning and found the pride of his life, Tom Jr., gone? Were only his wife absent, that would mean little to him. But Tommy! Alice dropped helplessly into one of the big, cushioned chairs to await the man of the house. She knew there was no use in going to bed, even if she had felt inclined to do so. As soon as Tom returned, he would, of course, do as he had always done, go to young Tom's room to assure himself that all was well, and then when he found him gone, he would probably wake up the whole neighborhood. The hours slowly crawled by, and just as the clock struck 2, the powerful lights of Blake's car flashed against the white doors of the garage. Alice arose from her chair, switched on the main light in the room, and nervously prepared to greet the master. As soon as the door opened and Tom Blake saw Alice, he seemed to sense something amiss. "Why are you up at this hour, Alice?" He was trying to act natural, but making a poor job of it. "Why, I'm waiting for Mrs. Blake," she faltered. "Is Tommy in bed?" "No, sir, he isn't." Blake rushed upstairs, clicking on every electric switch that he passed. Into Tommy's room he dashed, only to find it empty. Then on to Louise's room, empty too. He snatched up her telephone, dialed her father's home, and waited in a fever of impatience till the ringing was finally answered. No, Louise was not there. No, neither was Tommy. No, they could tell him nothing. He slammed down the phone, only to jerk it up again and call the chief of detectives, informing the official of the disappearance of his son and bidding him locate the boy without getting the case into the newspapers. Early the following morning, while detectives were warming to their job of tracing her and her son, Louise Blake, now known as Yvonne Bierce, was making her way to the downtown district of Lawson as applicant for the position she had seen advertised in the paper. She who had never known in her whole life what it was to do a day's work was now in search of a job. Her prayers were answered and her application was favorably passed upon by the management. From that day, business in the ladies' furnishings department of the Lawson department store began to pick up. Louise had very definite ideas on style and methods of advertising, and the charm of her personality was not lost on purchasers. Nearly a month slipped by. Life in the little home went on evenly. An elderly Catholic woman, Miss Shanahan, had been secured to attend to the house and prepare their meals. Tommy went every day to the parish school, where he was well liked by both pupils and teachers. He was a bright lad, and lessons came easy to him. But in spite of this, his mother insisted that he take his work seriously, that no one in the class be allowed to get higher marks. Fall faded into winter. Christmas came and went. And now the blustery winds began to soften into almost springtime gentleness. Easter was not very far away. The Lawson department store, ambitious from recent successes, resolved to show something special in the way of hats and dresses. So it was that Yvonne Bierce was asked to go to New York as the buyer for her department and trusted with full power to purchase as she thought best. When Louise was first asked to undertake the trip, she refused. She knew she would be running the risk of discovery, for she was certain her husband would be doing everything in his power to locate his son. In this certainty, of course, she was correct. More than once Tom Blake had come to fierce words with the chief of the detectives, but to no avail. The only reply he could get was that everything possible was being done. But Louise was finally prevailed upon to reconsider. The trip to New York was taken, and everything worked out well. She made some very shrewd purchases, and in general used her responsibility to the entire satisfaction of her employer. The night of her return, canvas covered the windows of the Lawson department store, and the evening papers carried a space-filling announcement of the coming style show under the direction of Madame Yvonne Bierce, famous New York stylist. This was out of the ordinary for Lawson, but the company owners had complete confidence in their department head. They expected a great turnout, and to prevent any theft in the anticipated crush, they actually hired 2 detectives. And there was a great turnout. What a day of business it was for the store, and what a day of triumph for the New York stylist. Before noon all Yvonne's smart goods were sold out. "Madame Bierce," said the proprietor, beaming, "never before has Lawson seen the like. You know, I have been doing some thinking. September 10th will be our 5th anniversary here. Now I know that sounds like a long way off, but I want you to begin making preparations for it." "I shall be glad to help you. I'll make my plans and then talk them over with you." The days wore on, and at last school closed for the summer. Louise made 2 more trips to New York, and everything worked out very well. September came all too soon to suit Tommy, but he soon got into the swing of his classes once more. For several days preceding the anniversary celebration at the Lawson department store, large advertisements appeared in the newspapers, and people talked excitedly about the coming event. Louise reached home every evening quite exhausted from her work. But September 10th came and went in a blaze of glory. The proprietor was delighted almost beyond speech by the success of all their plans. That night as Louise stepped onto a streetcar, an automobile containing 2 rather well-dressed men passed along very near it. There was nothing out of the ordinary about the happening, and Louise paid no attention to it. When the car stopped at the corner where she was accustomed to get off, the automobile was but slightly ahead of it. Louise walked down the little street in which she and Tommy lived, and was just stepping onto the lawn in front of her cottage when an automobile coming from the opposite end of the street drove past. The 2 men in it looked straight ahead, apparently not observing her, but she could not help noticing that it was the same car. The idea of being identified had been constantly in her mind ever since she had left New York, and now she was alarmed. However, she put the incident from her mind, engrossed as she was in the happiness of the day. "Oh, Mother, you're late tonight, aren't you?" It was Tommy jumping up to greet her. "Yes, Tommy, but today was a big day. Mother is to get a raise in salary and have much less work to do. Won't that be fine?" "And will we move into a better place then, like you said?" "Yes, Tommy, we must get a better place. You must grow up in a much better home than this. Soon you will be going to high school. You're getting to be a big boy now." After supper that night they talked over the unusual day at the Lawson department store, and when 9 o'clock came they went to bed happy and contented. The following afternoon, about an hour after Tommy had returned from school, he went out on the front lawn to examine a little plot of ground in which he had planted tulip bulbs, and which he scrutinized daily, though he knew there would be no blooms before spring, when an automobile slowly drew up toward the curb and one of its occupants tooted the horn. Tommy looked up for a moment, but the car moved along in a leisurely fashion. Why had the horn been blown at him? He noticed that both men had been looking toward him. But they were gone now. The tulip bed once more claimed his attention. The next day as he was coming home from school, he passed Katie Brown's restaurant. Out in front of it, empty, stood an automobile like the one which had cruised past the night before. As soon as Tommy recognized it, his mind turned from it to the men he felt sure were in eating at Katie's greasy counter. Through his memory then passed the events of that first strange night in Lawson. But the boy walked on home, presently thinking of other things. Fall was in the air, the odor of autumn leaves was apparent. He approached his tulip bed for the daily visit. However, he had barely stooped over it when the car drove past again, just as it had done the night before. Tommy became definitely suspicious. He went into the house and told the cook what had happened. She in turn called Louise's attention to it that evening. Louise immediately felt alarmed. Had Katie told the two men about the Blakes? Had she kept the torn calling card all this time? "Don't come home by way of Katy Street tomorrow afternoon, Tommy," said his mother in troubled tones. "And when you get home, don't go out on the lawn. Watch from behind the curtains in the front room and see if that car comes past again. I'm afraid something is up." End of chapter 1. The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Off again. The next day was a very uneasy one for Mrs. Blake. In spite of the fact that she had left strict orders to Tommy not to pass by Katie's, she could hardly wait until closing time to hurry off to him. She trusted him to observe her commands, but she had a strange feeling that something might happen to him. What was there to prevent anyone from breaking into the house if determined to do some harm to the boy? "No car today, Mother. I watched very carefully, and so did Miss Shanahan. Perhaps we have become alarmed over something we need not worry about at all. But I believe in being careful, Mother." "Sure, and I think you're worrying too much about that car, Mrs. Blake, though I do say it's best to be on the safe side these days. Glory be to St. Joseph. 'Tis a pity folks can't be safe anywhere in this country. Sure, in Ireland things are not like this. I never heard of people being afraid to stay in their own houses or even out in their own yards." "But we're far away from Ireland, Delilah Shanahan." "And a pity it is. I often wish I were there again. God love it." "May I go to school tomorrow?" put in Tommy. "Yes, Tommy. Delilah, you go along part of the way and be ready at about the same distance when school is out. I am sure no harm will come to Tommy if he is with you." "God pity the man who would try to get the lad while I'm about. He'd find he had his hands full." But that day likewise no one showed up. And so life seemed about to go on peacefully to the great satisfaction of all concerned. On Wednesday afternoon Miss Shanahan was given a brief holiday, and Tommy and a few classmates romped along their homeward way together. "I'm expecting Mother to come to meet me in our car, Tom," said Jimmy McNamara. "And if she gets here, we'll be glad to take you home. When she's coming, she's usually here by this time, though things often happen which upset her plans. Here she is. Come, Tommy." Up to the curve drove a fine big car with a well-dressed lady of about 35 in it. "Mother, this is Tom Blake. I told him we'd take him home. He doesn't live very far, but I know he would enjoy a little ride with us." "By all means, Tommy. I'll be glad to have you. Jimmy has often spoken to me about you." "Don't bother about me, Mrs. McNamara. I have only a short way to go, so I'll walk along with the other boys here. Thanks just the same." "I'll be glad to take all of them if you wish, Tommy. There is certainly plenty of room in the car. What do you say?" "No, thanks. We'll soon be home. We need the exercise after being in school all day." "Good bye, Tommy," shouted Jimmy as the car pulled away. "So long, fellows." "So long, Jim," came from the five on the sidewalk. "We'll see you tomorrow." A short time after that a second car came along. In it were two well-dressed men, one driving and the other slouching in the back seat. They drove by leisurely, almost unnoticed by the boys. Even Tommy paid little attention to the car, for it was not the one he had been watching for. Soon the boy was home. He went in and, of course, found no one there. He locked the door behind him as his mother had told him to do. Then, as was his custom on returning from school, he went out into the kitchen, where a little lunch was spread for him on the table. After he had eaten, he stretched himself upon the bed and was soon asleep. How long Tommy slept he did not know, but into his dream came a voice as of someone calling him. He awoke. It was dark in his room, but through the crack in the door he saw a light. "Tommy," again came the voice. This time he knew it was no dream. He opened his eyes, looked about him, and then jumped out of the bed. His mother was already home from work and had supper prepared. "Well, son, what a sleeper you are! You slept right through all the noise I made in getting supper." "Hello, Mother. Gee, I didn't mean to sleep so long. I've been in bed since school was out. I came home with the boys. Jimmy McNamara's mother wanted to bring me home in her automobile, but I told her I needed the exercise, so I walked home." "That's fine. Now I have some good news for you. I've put an ad in the paper for a new home for us. Won't that be fine? It is about time we are getting out of this poor district. I really never did like the place, but it was the best thing we could get at that time." "And will I have to leave St. Mary's School, Mother?" "I hope not, son. I have specified that I want to live in the school area, and I hope we will be able to get something nice there. If not, we'll wait until June and then move. At least you will not have to break up your school year." "That'll be great. I would hate very much to leave all my friends, and the sisters too. They have been very good to me. And besides that, Tommy, it would not be good for your classwork. It is not very easy to get used to a new school." In a few days Mrs. Blake received a response to her advertisement, but she did not like the location of the preferred home and refused it. Then the following Wednesday a lady called at the Lawson department store and asked for Madame Bierce. "I saw your ad, Madame Bierce, and would like to take you out to see a fine apartment I have to rent. I have my car here, and if you care to come, I can take you now." "Can you wait for a few minutes? The store will be closing soon, and then I can go with you." The owner of the store appeared on the scene at that moment and overheard her words. "Don't wait, Madame Bierce," he said at once. "Go right along now. It is nearly closing time, and we can take care of the business in your department till then." While Mrs. Blake was being driven out to see the apartment, another car proceeded toward the little home where Tommy, all alone, for it was Miss Shanahan's afternoon off, was awaiting his mother's return. He sat at the dining room table doing his lessons, and momentarily expecting to hear her key in the door. Suddenly there were steps on the porch. Never doubting that they were hers, he ran to the door and threw it open. Instead of seeing his mother, he beheld the two men of the previous episode. Before the boy had time to recover his speech, one of them addressed him pleasantly. "Hello, Sonny. Is your father or mother at home?" "No, sir, neither." Thinking the interview over, he was about to shut the door when the older man said in a very quiet tone, "And the maid is also away this afternoon?" "Yes, but Mother will be home any minute now. She is usually here by this time." "No, she won't be home, Tommy. We've taken care of that." Then, turning to the partner, he said, "Come in." Tommy now became alarmed. Why had he been so foolish as to open the door without first peeping through the curtain to see who was there? That was what his mother had told him to do. Who were these men? How did they know his name? "Get your hat and coat, Tommy. You're going along with us. Don't get upset now, and don't make any noise." "Who are you? What do you want with me?" "I told you to be quiet." "What do you want? You have no business in here." "Unless you pipe down, young man, you're going to get hurt. Do you understand?" The man took hold of Tommy's hand and gripped it like a vice. "Let's get your hat and coat. That's all you'll need. Hurry up now." They led Tommy over to the hall tree, helped him on with his coat, and then headed for the door. There they paused. "See here, young man, we are not going to hurt you. You just come along with us and keep your mouth shut. That is all we ask of you. If you let a peep out of you, we'll have to gag you. Do you hear?" "Yes, sir, but where are we going? Who sent you here for me? Aren't we going to wait for Mother? She'll be worrying about me when she comes home and can't find me. Let me write a note for her, will you, please? That will keep her from worrying about me." "Don't worry about such things, Sonny. We'll take good care of you. Remember, be absolutely quiet." They opened the door and escorted Tommy out to a big car waiting at the curb. One man took the wheel. The other got into the back seat with the boy. No words were exchanged between them. Each evidently knew exactly what to do. That was no hit and miss affair, he thought. Everything had been carefully planned. They were either experienced kidnappers or well-trained detectives. "We're going to have a fine ride now, Tommy. Do you recognize these streets?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Step on it, Jim. Let's get going. Well, Tommy," turning back to the boy, "you won't need to see any more for a while." Before Tommy realized what was happening, the man encircled his eyes with a heavy scarf, through which he could see nothing. The poor boy was naturally frightened, uncertain of what sinister design his captors might have. His companions evidently realized this and tried to allay his fears. "Don't be frightened, Tommy. You're in good company. We're friends of yours. There are a lot of things you will find out later, but we can't tell you now. It's too bad to treat a good little fellow like you this way, but we can't help it. It's getting dark fast, and in a short time we can take this cloth off your eyes. We just don't want you to see where we are going for a while." For some time the car sped along at an even pace. Suddenly Tommy felt it make a sharp turn and then go on at a great increase of speed. Were they afraid that someone would follow them? Were they leaving the regular highway? Were they taking him into some cave or wood to hide him for a ransom? "It's 10 to 7, Jim. Step on the gas. We have 50-odd miles to go yet, you know." "Don't begin to worry, Charlie. We'll make it. We don't want to get there too soon." They lapsed back into silence. "Mother is home by now, isn't she?" asked Tommy. He was impelled to talk, even to his enemies, because he was beginning to feel very lonely. It was the first time in his young life that anything as strange as this had happened to him. But that was not his only motive for speaking. He wanted to hear what these men would say of his mother. He had always been very careful not to do anything to displease or disturb her, and he knew that she must already be very worried about him. "Yes, Tommy, she's at home by now. She was out looking for a new home, you know." "Yes, I know. But she'll be worrying about me, sir." "No, I left a note on the table telling her not to worry. She knows that you are in no danger, and that will be enough for her. There are other things in that note also, which I cannot tell you at present, but everything is going to work out for the best." "But did you leave her my address?" "No, I didn't. I couldn't do that now." "Does my father know about this?" "You'll find out about that later." "But you don't know how mothers are, sir. I know mine will worry." "Sorry." Tommy could tell by that lone word that the conversation was over. If they were his friends, as they claimed to be, why should they be so silent? True, they had not treated him roughly thus far, although he was completely in their power and could have done nothing if they had been ugly to him. What the future held for him, he could not guess. He offered up a silent prayer for himself and his mother. After a long pause, Tommy's companion untied the scarf and took it off in silence. It was very dark now, and the car was apparently on a country road, for there were very few lights to indicate human habitations. But as his eyes became accustomed to being without the covering, he noticed on the far horizon what seemed like the clustered illumination of a city. Toward it the machine was being driven with a steady purr. Under normal conditions Tommy would have enjoyed a ride like this. He had been used to pleasant rides through city and country all his life. It was only since he had left his father's a few months ago that he had been deprived of the luxury of an automobile. But tonight he was not enjoying himself in the least. Every additional mile that the car took him from his mother increased his anxiety and his dislike for the men who were with him. Another half hour and the car was mixing up with the city traffic. Everything was unfamiliar to Tommy, but he asked no questions. They speedily made the corner of a busy street, and above the noise of the traffic Tommy could hear the bells of several trains nearby. Then the car came to an abrupt pause in front of a large railway station, and all its occupants alighted. As they did so, the boy observed the driver give a sign to a man who stood near, and without a word this newcomer stepped into the vacated automobile and drove it away. "I'll go ahead and get the tickets, Jim." And as the man called Charlie turned toward the row of ticket windows, Tommy and his companion made their way in the direction of the exits to the tracks where already crowds awaited the opening of the gates. Above the entrances were signs announcing the train numbers and schedules and the important cities on the various routes. Tommy watched for only one thing, to see whether they were going toward the track marked New York. At first he thought they were, but suddenly his companion came to a halt. As he turned to survey the crowd, his accomplice stepped up with the tickets. "The schedule shows that the train's a few minutes late, Jim. Do you want to sit down over there? There's room for all of us, and it is a nice quiet spot." "No, thanks, Charlie. We'll be sitting long enough, don't you think? You won't mind standing a while, will you, Tommy?" "No, sir. But I want to go back to..." For a moment Tommy considered the advisability of screaming to attract the attention of the crowd and thereby possibly getting away from his captors, and they were not slow to realize that fact. "Remember what I told you. If you dare make a sound, young man, you'll never get to see your mother again. If you know what is good for you, you will obey my commands." That was the end of Tommy's thoughts of escape. The hard lines on the face of his captor told him very forcibly that he was capable of harsh deeds as well as unpleasant words. "There's the train. She's not as late as they thought she'd be. Here comes the porter with our grips, so everything is okay." "You're going to have a fine ride, Tommy. You'll enjoy it in the morning, I'm sure, when it gets light. There will be plenty of interesting things to see along the way, especially when we get up into the mountains. We won't see any bears or Indians such as you read about in boys' books, but there will be beautiful scenery." As the train pulled in under the spread of the station, and its noise half deafened those on the platform, one of the men again reminded Tommy that he was to keep silent regarding them and his mother. "Now we're going to get on the train, Tommy. I hope it will not be necessary for me to have to remind you again of the things I spoke to you about. I'll keep an eye on you. You know I can have you locked alone in a room on the train, but I hope that will not be necessary. Come on." Without another word they entered the train, preceded by the red cap with their luggage. The sight of the suitcases secretly upset Tommy again, for up until then he had seen no luggage, and hence he felt they could not be going far. But he remembered what he had been told and tried his best to appear calm. "Lower 5 and 6, sir," said the porter as he deposited the baggage under the seats. "Thank you, sir." "Now, Tommy, take off your cap and make yourself at home. Anytime you want anything, just let me know. You can have anything you want. This is going to be a fine ride for you." Tommy was having a very difficult time trying to look his part. Only the fear inspired in him by his companions kept him from screaming as the train pulled out of the station. "We'd better get into the diner, Jim, and get something to eat. It's quite late, and I'm sure Tommy is hungry by now. What do you say, boy?" "I don't care for anything." "But you must have something to eat. Come now." With a return of his old menacing attitude, the man took him by the hand. There was nothing for the boy to do but go along. He would try his best at submission, at least for the time being. Now that the train had started, he could not get off. "The diner is ahead of us, Tommy, so let's get to it." The head waiter of the dining car at once seated the three at a vacant table. Jim and Charlie made out their menu, and then Jim jotted down the things he thought a boy would like. And in spite of his depressed spirits, Tommy fell to his meal like any other healthy youngster of his age. After all, it was a wonderful meal, much like those he had had at home months before. If it had only been his mother sitting across from him instead of a frightening stranger. "How is it, Tommy?" asked Jim. "It's very good, sir." "That's the boy. I knew you'd like it." And so the meal went on until Tommy became noticeably sleepy. Then back to their seats in the Pullman went the three. "Say, Charlie, do you know how late it is?" "Not exactly, Jim, but I can tell it's beyond Tommy's bedtime." "I'm getting off at the next stop, you know." The man addressed nodded, and then said to Tommy, "I'll ring for the porter and get him to make up a berth." "I'm not very sleepy, sir. I can stay up longer." "I don't think you had better, Tommy. You need your rest." And as the porter appeared on the scene, "Porter, make up lower 6. The boy is sleepy." End of chapter 2. Of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Into the Unknown. The night hours dragged for Tommy, for they were filled with anxiety. Had he only been told his destination, the waiting for what tomorrow would bring would have been easier. As it was, for a long time he did not sleep, despite his earlier drowsiness. He lay there listening, hoping that he would hear something from one or the other of his companions that would give him some clue as to their identity. If he should finally make up his mind that they were criminals planning to hold him for ransom, he was resolved to take a chance on accosting the Pullman porter. He might be able in secret to induce the man to wire his father, or better still, to telegraph his mother at the Lawson department store. When his wrist watch told Tommy that it was 1 o'clock in the morning, he looked through the curtains of his compartment and observed that all the berths had been made up, and that only the lights on the floor of the car illumined the narrow corridor between the rows of curtains. He listened, but nothing came to his ears except the steady drone of the wheels and the measured breathing of the sleeper across the aisle from him. Then a new thought came to him. From time to time the train had stopped along the way. Would it be wise to put on his clothes and be ready to get off at the next halt? No one would notice him. Each porter knew the destination of the people in his coach, so there would be no need for them to be up. Moreover, Tommy thought he knew how to raise the trap over the steps of the car leading to the station platform. Some stray trainmen might observe him as he made a dash for freedom, but surely they would not let the train wait just because a boy passenger had jumped off it. Just as Tommy was about to follow the line of action these thoughts suggested, another idea came. Even if he succeeded in getting off, where would he be? Would he be able to make his way to someone who could help him get back to his mother? He turned to the window of his berth, pulled up the shade which covered it, and looked out. There was nothing but blackness. His sense of sight, then, could not help him to decide. For many miles he rode with his face pressed against the glass, straining his eyes. Was there nothing but wilderness? Seemingly, for he had noticed only spare lights at long intervals in the darkness when sleep finally overcame him. When Tommy awoke it was light. His watch said 7 o'clock. He turned to the curtains round his berth, pulled them apart a little, and then observed through the opening that his was the only compartment not made up. He felt rather ashamed of himself. Now there would be no chance for escape. Why had he been so careless as to fall asleep? Across from Tommy sat the man called Charlie and another man whose face was almost completely turned from Tommy toward the window. Tommy took a second look at this stranger and thought there was something familiar about him, yet something that was puzzling too. Letting the curtains fall together, he began to dress and was about ready to step out into the aisle when a shock went through him. He heard a well-known voice say: "How often did you see Mrs. Blake? Did she look well?" The puzzle was solved. The stranger was his father, and the unusual thing about him was that he was thinner and paler than Tommy last remembered him to have been, and also that he now wore a small mustache. That was why the boy had not recognized him at first. For a long moment Tommy sat there, wondering what he should do. He was happy to learn from what he had overheard that his father still cared about his mother. Perhaps he himself might be the means of bridging the chasm between them. "Where did you find the boy, Charlie? Was he well dressed?" "He was at home when we got there. When he gets up you'll see what kind of clothes he is wearing. We took him just as he was. There was no time to spare. Mrs. Blake was due almost any time. You know, she dropped a calling card in a restaurant. That was how we found them." "Did Tommy make any objection to coming along with you? Did he put up a fight?" "Well, you know how a young fellow like that would be. He didn't know who we were, and of course he didn't like to leave without his mother. That's quite natural." "Yes, I suppose so." For a while there was silence. "I know how Louise feels by now, Charlie, but this just had to be. Tommy is a Blake. He must be raised like a Blake. None of this small town stuff, and none of this Catholic stuff either." "Not so loud, please. The boy will be hearing you. He's probably awake by this time." "Let him hear me. He has heard me before. He's my son. There's no use making a big mystery of the whole affair, is there?" "That's all true enough. But there is no use attracting the attention of the whole car either. The first thing you know, everything will be in the papers. Then what?" "You're right, Charlie. But when I get started on this religion question, nothing can keep me quiet. It's strange. I know of nothing that gripes me as that does." "Yes. Do you know, Tom, I've heard of people like you who ended by becoming Papists themselves." "I'd have to be crazy first," replied the other grimly. "We'll see." Only the purr of the wheels filled the car for a while after that outburst of feeling on the part of Tom Blake Sr. When he spoke again it was in a different tone. "But tell me, Charlie, what did Louise look like? How was she dressed? Does she look as if she was getting enough to eat? Is she working in a good place?" As Charlie was about to answer, Tommy unbuttoned the curtains of his compartment and stepped out into the aisle and confronted his father. For a long moment the two looked at each other. Then the boy rushed into the man's arms, and forgetting himself completely, began to cry. Realizing the situation, Charlie got up from his seat and strolled out of the car, leaving the father and son together until the first burst of excitement should be over. "My dear Tommy," was all that he heard as the door closed behind him. Luckily for the Blakes there were but few people left in the coach, and these were up in front. After Tommy had recovered himself, he sat beside his father and was bombarded with questions. He answered them all, and as soon as he had the chance inquired: "Where is Mother? Will you write and let her know where I am? Or let me send her a telegram?" "Now, my dear son, let us not talk about her. I have many fine plans for you, but you must have your breakfast. It is pretty late, but I think we can get something yet. The diner will be empty and we can keep on talking. Come, let's go back there. Are you hungry?" "No, Dad, not at all." "Oh, you must be by this time. It is really quite late. I'm sure you'll get up an appetite when you see what they have to eat." The diner was empty save for a couple of waiters eating their own belated meal. One of them jumped to his feet as the pair entered and seated them at a table. "We are a little late, but I suppose you can still wait on us?" "To be sure, sir. I am very happy to wait on you and the little gentleman. Just bring me a cup of coffee. But I want you to set up a real breakfast for the boy here. He has a fine appetite and I want him to have the best you've got." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll do that, sir. Do you want to look over the menu, sir?" "No, don't bother. Just bring out what you think a healthy little American would want to eat for breakfast. You're waiting on them on the train all the time, aren't you?" "Yes, sir. But I thought he might like to order for himself. Most of them do, sir." With that the waiter was off to get Tommy's breakfast. "I can't help wondering at how healthy you look, Tommy, and you're getting more and more like me every day." "People used to tell me I looked like Mother, Dad." "Don't let them fool you. We still have about an hour's ride, Tommy, so you can take your time." "Where are we going, Dad? Not to New York, are we? I looked for it on the schedule in the station when we got here, But it wasn't on the gate we came through." "No, we are not on the way to New York, Tommy. I am taking you to a fine boarding school. I have always had great dreams for you, and one of the most necessary things for you in realizing them is a proper education. I have picked out the best school in the country, and I'm sure you will like it. All the arrangements are made. You are to live there as Thomas Blake, Jr., the son of the Blakes. This may sound a little strange to you, Tommy, but I never want you to forget that you are a Blake. The place to which you are going is open only to selected pupils. You will meet the country's best and have the greatest of teachers. And, Tommy, I never want you to say anything about your mother. Never mention her to anyone. It is no one's business." "But she is going to come to see me, isn't she, Dad?" "No, Tommy, she is not. I have given strict orders that you are to see no one except myself, or those sent to you by me." "And can't I write to her either?" "The boys at this school must turn in all their letters to the principal. You will receive full instructions about that when you get there, Tommy." "But I do want to hear from Mother, Dad. I won't be happy there without her. I love you too, Dad, but I just must hear from Mother." "Now don't make a scene, Tommy. Just forget about your mother entirely. And at school you are not to say a thing about your escape from home, about your stay in Lawson. Above all, you are not to mention that your mother is a Catholic. There will be a minister at your school on Sundays. I have no objection to your going to the services." "What services, Dad? Do you mean to Mass?" "There will be no Mass at your school, Tommy, and you are not to go out for church services. You are to forget that you were ever baptized or ever went to Mass. That foolish business your mother put into your head. Get it out as soon as you can. The Blakes are not Papists or bead stringers." Just then the waiter came with the first course of Tommy's breakfast. It was an entirely different looking boy he saw this time. There were tears in his eyes, and the expression on his face made it plain to the waiter that something was very wrong. "There you are, sir. I hope you will enjoy this young gentleman," he said gently, deftly arranging the dishes in front of the boy before he made off to the kitchen. "I don't believe I care for any breakfast." "Now see here, Sonny, you must eat. I don't want you to be hungry when we get to the new school. Come, eat your melon. It looks very good." Tommy could hardly bring himself to swallow, though he was really hungry. "If I only knew how Mother is, I wouldn't mind so much." "Your mother is all right, Tommy. Charlie told me she looked very well. Here, try your coffee. It has been a long time since you have had such a fine breakfast as this. And don't say anything about your mother when the waiter is near us. I don't want any scene here." And so the meal went on. Tommy tried hard, but it was evident that he had little relish for his breakfast. At last the waiter came with the finger bowls. "Did the young sir enjoy his breakfast?" he asked, his broad smile showing 2 beautiful rows of teeth. "I'm sure he did," said Thomas Blake, Sr., not giving the boy a chance to speak for himself. Then the two made their way back to the coach where Charlie awaited them. "Did you have a good breakfast, Tommy?" "Yes, sir, I did." "Charlie is a friend of mine, Tommy. We've known each other for years." "I'm sorry that our first meeting was such as it was, Tommy," said the man, "but I'm sure that when you get older, you will understand what your father has done for you. I'm getting off at the next station. You and Dad will be going on for a while yet. I hope that you will like your new school. It's a wonderful place. There you will meet the finest boys in the country. But you'll find out all about it when you get there. If I had a boy of your age, it would be there that I would want him to go. I must pack up now. The train will soon pull into my station. Hope to have the pleasure of meeting you again soon." "Sure, Charlie, you'll get to see him. I'll take care of that," said Tom Blake, Sr. "And I want to thank you for all that you have done for me. I will let you hear from me when I get back home. I don't know just when that will be, because I have business that will keep me out of New York for some little time. So the other address will be the one to use. Keep your ears open, and if you get any news, let me hear from you." Soon the train stopped and Charlie got off, leaving Tommy with his father. "We still have a little way to go, son, and there are some things I want to tell you. When we get to the city, I will take you to a store and get you supplied with everything that you will need. I will leave plenty of money in the school office for you, so that you may have everything you will need or care to have. Just go to the principal for it at any time. He has had instructions from me. Study hard. I want you to be the head of your class, and I will deposit $10 for each point that you make over and above the next highest in your class." "How will you know who is the next highest?" "Kensington will write me all about that. The total you will receive, if you are good in your lessons, will give you a good-sized bank account by the time you have finished your course. And if you outstrip them in everything, well, you may ask for anything that you want. If you don't beat them in most of your studies, I will be very disappointed. Your principal, Basil Kensington, is an outstanding authority on psychology. All of your teachers are masters in their fields, Tommy, or the school would not keep them. I want you to show them that you have had splendid home training. They know nothing about you at present. They will form their opinion of you by what they see and hear of you." Tommy was actually very little interested in what his father was saying about the school. His mind was away with his mother. If he only knew how she was! What would she do if she knew that he was going to a school where he would not be allowed to practice his religion? Boy that he was, he realized how much his mother's faith had meant to her. Already he was trying to think out a way by which he could get a letter off to her, just to let her know where he was. "I will be able to stay but a short time at the school, Tommy, but I won't forget you. Remember that you are to have everything that you want. If you cannot get any particular thing there in the city, write to me and I'll see that it is sent to you." "How can I get in touch with you, Dad, after you are gone?" "The principal has my address, Tommy. You may write to me as often as you wish. Put the letter into an envelope and give it to him. He will have it addressed and sent on to me. I will see that you get a quick answer to all your letters. I want you to write me frequently. Let me know how you like the place, how you are getting along in your studies. Tell me anything special that you would like to have. Remember that Dad has plenty of money and can get you whatever you want. I am repeating that so that you will not forget it." "If you love me, Dad," begged Tommy, trying out his father in a last desperate effort, "please let me write to Mother. That would be worth more than anything money could buy." "Tommy, I have told you you are not to mention your mother. That's final. You don't understand now, but you will later on. Just trust me for the present." The boy thought he had better say nothing more on the subject. After his father left, he might be able to figure out a way by which he could get the letter off to her. To insist now might only result in a greater disaster for him. They had been pulling into what looked like a fair-sized city. The porter now entered the car, picked up the suitcase that lay under the seat, and took it out upon the platform. He then returned and announced the station just as the train came to a stop. From the station they rode in a taxi to a clothing store, and there Tommy was fitted out with the finest clothes on the premises. "We will go to a hotel now, Tommy. I want you to get a bath and put on your new clothes, and then we will go out to the school." About an hour later, Tommy emerged from the hotel, dressed according to the latest expensive mode for boys. He looked every inch a prince, and his father was very proud of him. "We'll get a cab now and go out to see your new home. I am very sure that you will like it." The cab drove them through the city and then out into a beautiful suburb. It came to a stop in front of a massive stone building which bore the name of Washington Irving Academy. End of chapter 3. The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. At the Academy. Washington Irving Academy is a swanky school for developing millionaires. At one time it had been conducted for those who were especially gifted mentally, each boy being allowed to progress as rapidly as he could. Now the requirements of intellectual superiority no longer held. Anyone could attend the academy who had money enough to pay its tuition fees. Even so, of course there were some exceptional students among the number. The academy itself consisted of several beautiful modern buildings, partly hidden in a delightful grove of trees. The plans for the place had been designed very carefully. The administration building, to which Tommy and his father had gone to speak to the principal, was a gem of architecture, done in pure Georgian and furnished in the best of that period's pieces. The office of the Academy looked less like an office than any that either of the Blakes had ever seen. It was more like a beautiful parlor than anything else, and was entirely in keeping with the policy of the school. Everything like a home. The principal had thought out that motto and was very proud of it. It was printed on all of the stationery. Into this office the Blakes had been conducted by the liveried colored man whose business it was to attend to the door. "The principal, please," was all the senior Blake had to say, and the negro was off to locate the master. How long Basil Kensington had been principal of the Academy the present generation did not know. He had been there when some of their fathers studied there, and through the years he had developed many foibles. One of them was that he very seldom went away, and was nearly always to be found in his private study, but waited there for some minutes after having been told that he was wanted, thus hoping to surround himself with an air of importance. Today was no exception. Not for several minutes after the departure of the negro did Basil Kensington stride, immaculately clad, into the Academy office. "Basil Kensington, principal of the Academy," he said by way of introducing himself to the Blakes. "Thomas Blake, sir, and my son, Thomas." "Ah, yes, Thomas Blake. I'm delighted to meet you. And you too, Thomas. Come, be seated. You have my correspondence regarding my son, Mr. Kensington?" "Indeed, Mr. Blake, everything is satisfactory. I feel perfectly sure that Thomas will be happy here. We now have 80 boys, Mr. Blake. They are sons of the country's best, you know. We have no room for others." "Would you mind showing me around, sir?" "Delighted, Mr. Blake. Come along with me. You may leave your things here for the present." Despite the fact that it was the principal himself who personally conducted them through the school, Tommy was very little interested in what they saw. But Mr. Blake was well pleased with everything. It was very evident that nothing had been spared to make the administration building a model. The corridors were wide and well lighted, the rooms large and airy, the furniture in the classrooms the very latest. Here there were no rows of desks such as one sees in ordinary schools. The chairs were comfortably cushioned and placed much as furniture would be placed in a home. "It is our desire to have everything as informal as possible," Mr. Kensington informed them. "My personal philosophy is that school is training for life. No one has chairs set in rows in his home, does he, Mr. Blake? Then why have them that way in the school? The classes are small. I don't want to have more than 10 or 12 in a room. We have enough teachers, and so our boys can have individual attention. The teacher may sit wherever he wills, and so do the boys. When the classes are in session, they look much like a group of young men gathered about an elder who is telling them a story. I don't suppose the system will work in a large school, but Washington Irving Academy will never be a large school, Mr. Blake. I will not permit it to become large." There was a note of emphasis upon the pronoun. "Now we will go over and see the dormitory buildings. We have 2 at present. Come this way, sir." The principal led the way down the corridor to a door which gave out upon a rolling lawn, across which smooth stone walks led through beautiful beds of flowers. "This is Lowell Hall, Mr. Blake. This is where Thomas is to live. At least it is the dormitory about which we have had correspondence. If you are not satisfied with it, or if the boy prefers something else, just let me know." "This is a very fine building, Mr. Kensington. It seems quite deserted this afternoon. Where are the boys? I have not seen a single one since I came in." "Most of them are in the gymnasium at present, Mr. Blake. We will go there later if you care to see them. This is one of the teachers' rooms," continued the principal, opening the door to give a glimpse inside. "Some of our teachers live here, you know, to be with the boys, to be their pals, as it were. Others live in the city and go back and forth. The rooms I have chosen for Thomas are down this way, sir." He led the way down toward the middle of the building. "Here they are. This is his study. A beautiful room, isn't it, Mr. Blake?" "Yes, sir, it is. What do you think of it, Tommy?" "It's very fine, Dad." "And this door leads into his bedroom, Mr. Blake. I believe in private bedrooms. I don't think the boys should study in the same room in which they sleep, as they have to do in many schools. And this door leads into his private bath. Now what do you think of it?" "I like the arrangement very well. I am sure Tommy will also. And on each floor there are 3 parlors. I want you to see them. This way, please," ushering them down a broad corridor as he spoke, Here is one of them. When the lads have visitors they use these rooms. Each is fitted out in period furniture. Just a moment, please." A fine-looking young man of about 30 had passed the door. The principal called to him. "Come here, Mr. Mullen." Then turning to his guest. "Mr. Blake, I want you to meet one of our teachers, Mr. Mullen. He is the head of our English department." "I'm happy to meet you, Mr. Mullen. This is my son, Thomas. Will you have him in your class?" "Yes, I suppose I'll have him. I teach most of the boys who study English. I'm glad to meet you, Thomas. You'll pardon me, Mr. Blake, if I seem to be in a hurry. I have an appointment with one of my publishers, and I have kept him waiting for some time. I hope to have the pleasure of seeing you again." "Go right ahead, Mr. Mullen. We'll be going along to look at the rest of the place. Glad I met you." "Thank you, Mr. Blake. Goodbye. So long, Thomas." With that, Byron Mullen was off, but in the brief moment that Tommy had had in his company, there had arisen in him a strange feeling of attachment for the English teacher. He hoped that Mr. Mullen was one of the teachers living on the campus. As soon as he could, he would find out more about him. "Mr. Mullen is one of our best teachers, Mr. Blake." "Does he live on the campus, Mr. Kensington?" put in Tommy. "Yes. In fact, he lives next door to you." "Thank you, sir," replied Tommy, secretly happy over the news. "And now, Mr. Blake, would you like to go to the gymnasium to see the boys at play?" "If you please." "We will go this way, sir." As the three walked toward the gymnasium, the tour of inspection was continued. "That is Holmes Hall, named in honor of Oliver Wendell. It is also a dormitory building, much like the one we just left. There is the chapel, and just beyond it, Cooper Library, one of the most complete academy libraries in the country. Yonder is the gymnasium. Down there to the right is the stable for the riding horses, but that building is more than a quarter of a mile from here. We have about 5 miles in bridle path on our own property. There are some 20 boys out riding at the present. One of the history classes, a group of about 10, are now with Mr. Livingston at one of the theaters in the city, seeing A Tale of Two Cities, so most of the others are in here." The gymnasium was a spacious building, equipped with every modern appliance for physical culture. A game of basketball was being played, and those not engaged in the game itself were sitting around watching its progress. It was Tommy's first chance to observe his future companions. They were a very well-dressed group, as might have been expected. One of the things that attracted his attention was the fact that some of them were no larger than himself. That was comforting to him. "Games are a regular part of the training here, Mr. Blake. Unless the doctor forbids, each boy participates in athletics." "That's a very good idea. I want Tommy to enter into as much activity as you see fit. He has not been getting much exercise lately." "Now we can go back to the parlor, Mr. Blake, if you care to." "Yes, Mr. Kensington, for I must soon be leaving. I am going west for about a month. Some business to attend to." Back in the administration building again, the two men completed their talk, and Mr. Blake began his goodbyes to Tommy. Just at that moment Mr. Mullen came down the walk past the door where the father and son were standing. "Are you leaving already, Mr. Blake?" "Yes, Mr. Mullen. I must catch the next train. I'm going on a trip west for about a month. I want you to take good care of Tommy here. I understand you live next door to him." "So I hear, Mr. Blake. Tommy and I will get on very nicely, I'm sure." "I'll not forget you, Mr. Mullen, if you act somewhat as a guardian for my son while he is here. He's not been away from home much, and you know how that is." "Just leave him to me, sir. I'll take good care of him. Goodbye, Mr. Blake. Go along out to the road with your dad, Tommy, then come up to my room." Tommy bade farewell to his father as cheerfully as he could. He could not help thinking of his mother, and how she might at this moment be sick from worrying about him. And as soon as he was alone, he made his way, with tears in his eyes, to his own rooms instead of to Mr. Mullen's apartment, as he had promised. But Mr. Mullen knew boys. He heard Tommy enter and went over to talk to him. He found him exactly where he had expected to find him, on the bed, crying. "Now, Tommy, don't cry. You must not let the boys see you crying. They will all laugh at you, though I must say they all had their own crying spell at first. Sit up now and tell me about your home. Where's your mother?" "My mother is at home, sir. She doesn't know I'm here. I'm not supposed to talk about her." But you can talk about anything you want to me, Tommy. I'm your friend. You can trust me." "My father lives in New York, Mr. Mullen. I'm sure you have been there." "Yes, Tommy, I've been there many times. Here, let's open up your collar. You'll feel better that way." Unbuttoning the boy's shirt collar, the teacher saw the scapular medal beneath. "Tommy, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?" "Ask me anything you want, Mr. Mullen." "Are you a Catholic?" "Yes, sir, I am." "That's strange. How did you happen to come to this school? There are no Catholics here. That is, not among the boys." "My father brought me here, sir. I had nothing to say about it, and neither did my mother. She is a Catholic, and so am I." "Now I tell you what you had better do, Tommy. Take your scapular medal off and wear it in your pocket. There no one will see it, and you will not get into any trouble. If the boys see it, and they will if you wear it around your neck, something is liable to happen." "I can do that, sir, so long as I have it with me. That's all that is necessary." "Tommy, you can keep a big secret, can't you?" "Yes, sir, I can. Cross my heart." "I'm a Catholic also. If you were to tell anyone, I would lose my job at once. So you see how important it is for you to keep the secret. I am here for a definite purpose. Once in a while a boy like yourself comes here, and I make it my business to find it out. Then I do all I can for him, for no one dreams that I am a Catholic. I consider it a part of my vocation to befriend and help Catholic boys who are brought here as you have been, I believe, by an atheist father. Am I right?" "Yes, sir, you are." "And no doubt your father told you not to talk to me about your mother?" "Yes, sir." "Well, Tommy, you must trust me. I'll give you private instructions in your religion. I may not be able to get permission to take you to Mass with me, for, as I say, no one thinks I am a Catholic. Remember our secret. Come now, let's fix up your room. Your trunk is here and so are your clothes. Let's hang them up. Before long the bell will ring for the boys to get ready for class. Then I'll take you to meet them. They are a nice crowd of boys, but you are the only Catholic here at present. We had one for a while last year, but he was sent away. We don't want anything like that to happen. Say your prayers regularly, and if we can work it, we'll get to church together once in a while. I go regularly, for I leave here each Saturday night and do not return until Sunday night. But don't worry. Get ready now, and when you hear the bell, come to my room. I'll be waiting for you." Not very long after Mr. Mullen's departure, the bell rang, and Tommy made his way at once to his teacher's room. He found the door open. "Come in, Tommy. I'll be ready in a minute. Then we will go over to class. I have your schedule of studies. I will introduce you to my boys and to some of your other teachers. Now then, let's go." On the way Mr. Mullen introduced Tommy to several of the boys, and to Mr. Clark Brown, teacher of history, and Mr. Randolph Thurston, teacher of mathematics. Then, just as they were about to enter the administration building, a lad ran up with a cheery greeting for Mr. Mullen. "Well, Claude, how are you? I want you to meet my friend Tommy Blake. He just came this afternoon." "I'm pleased to meet you, Tommy." "Claude lives next to you, Tommy. He is also in my class. Claude, you won't mind showing Tommy around a little for a few days, will you?" "I'll be glad to, Mr. Mullen." So Tommy now had a pal among the students, and it was not long before he had made many more. His pleasant ways endeared him to all who met him. Days and weeks drifted by. About once in a month Tommy received a letter from his father. There was nothing in these missives to relieve his anxiety about his mother. Moreover, he was never able to obtain the principal's permission to go to town. Mr. Kensington was carrying out the father's wishes to the letter. In the examinations, which were held a week before Christmas, Tommy outstripped every other member of his class. His total lead was 12 points, and he proudly wrote and told his father the news. A few days later a reply came, telling Tommy that the money had been deposited for him as promised. But there was one part of the letter that made the boy very unhappy. "I am sorry that I shall not be able to be with you for Christmas, as I had planned. Business will call me away at that time. You will receive a box from me the day before Christmas. Go to the office and get anything that you want. Show Mr. Kensington my letter to you on this point. I will, however, be with you right after the 1st of the year, no later than the 5th of the month. I hope to have a pleasant visit with you then." So Tommy was to spend his Christmas alone, and what a Christmas it was to be! He had not been able to go to church since he left Lawson. What would Christmas be without Holy Communion? He must figure out some way to get away from the school on that day. Possibly he would not be missed. Anyway, he would make his plans. End of chapter 4. Of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Crisis. Christmas that December dawned gloomily for Tommy. Never before had he faced such a holiday prospect. All of the teachers and nearly all of the students had scattered to their homes. Basil Kensington, who lived at the school, remained of course, and 2 other students, sons of wealthy divorcees, who were not wanted at home. Presents they had in abundance, much as the keeper might throw in excessive food for animals in a zoo, and with the same amount of grace. Several times on the day before Christmas heavy packages had arrived for Tommy. Carried to his room by the porter, most of them lay unopened just where they had been placed. Tommy sat at a window abstractedly looking out over the stretches of snow-covered lawn. This was no Christmas. It was just another gray day, like many of the past, and it opened up a vista of 10 other days of equal gloom ahead. No amount of presents could make up for his not being with his mother or for his inability to go to church. The other boys frolicked about the school, enjoying themselves. They were not in the least upset over the fact that no one came to see them. They had their presents, and after all, what else was Christmas but a day on which one got presents? That was all they had ever known about it. No one had told them about the Christ child. No one had explained to them why gifts are made at this time of the year. Passing along the corridor, one of the boys saw Tommy through the open door. "Merry Christmas, Tom." "Thanks, Ronald. Same to you." "You don't look very happy, Tom." "I'm not." "And you have all these presents. Why, you haven't even opened up some of them. What's the matter?" "I'm not used to spending my Christmas alone," Tommy said rather lamely. "This is the first time I have been away from home on this day." "Where's your old man? Isn't he coming to see you?" "No." "And your mother? Have you got one?" "Yes, Ronald," said Tom in a rather choking voice. "I have a mother, but I can't write to her. I'm not allowed to." "Well, I can write to mine, but she doesn't bother about me. She's married to another man now, and if I were with her, I would only do what she calls cramping her style. I had a swell dad, but he just couldn't get here, and anyway, the law gave me to my mother. It's a dizzy world, Tom." "It's good of you to come in, Ronald. Did you get a lot of presents?" "Yes, I got this ring and this wristwatch. I like these the best. But I got a new suit and another riding suit. I have boxes of candy and things like that. Why don't you open up your things? It would make you feel better." "No, I don't care to bother. I opened up some of them. They are all nice things, all from my father. When did you see your mother last, Ronald?" "Not for 3 years now. But I don't bother about that very much any more. I'm used to it." That attitude of a boy toward his mother was entirely foreign to Tommy. No wonder Ronald said this was a dizzy world. "Well, I guess I'll be going along, Tom. Clark Austin and I are going downtown to the movies this afternoon. Are you coming?" "No, I have to stay here." "Well, I'll be seeing you tonight, Tom." With that, Ronald was off to meet his chum and get ready for the movies. That evening Tommy Blake did not show up in the refectory for dinner, so Basil Kensington made it his business to go to the boy's room. He found him asleep, and noticed that he looked unusually flushed. The principal's first impulse was to awaken him, but on second thought he drew a blanket over the boy and left him. The next morning no one heard anything from Tommy. When the maid went to his room to straighten things up, as was her daily job, he was not there, but she thought nothing of his absence. Finally, an hour later, when the Kensingtons sent the porter up to the boy's room with breakfast, he received the report that Tommy was not to be found. "This is most strange. Search the entire premises at once, and report back to me within an hour." The search proved to be in vain. Dreading the possibility of newspaper notoriety, Basil Kensington called in a private detective agency to aid him in locating the missing boy. "Have you his picture?" asked the operative. "With our office records," said the principal, producing Tommy's photograph. "Now, sir, have you any idea when he left?" "I saw him last night at 7. He was then in bed. I have not seen him since." "Did he have money?" "Not with him. He has plenty in the office." "Did you notice anything missing from his room besides his overcoat and hat?" "Not a thing. Most of his packages have not even been opened." "Well, that's not much of a clue to work on, but it'll let you know what we find." The detective returned to his office and reported the case. He had just finished giving the meager details when a police flash came from a radio on the chief's desk. "Calling all cars! Calling all cars! Injured person along railroad track between 8th and Gary. Reported by engineer on the 9:50. Condition unknown." "That might be our boy, Chief. I'm going on the search. That's a long stretch from 8th to Gary." "Yes, but no streets cross the track in between. That's the reason for the vague location." The detective got into his car and hurried off, knowing that if he could beat the regular police officers, he would be well paid by Kensington. He parked his car at the corner of 8th Street and hurried down the tracks. No one was ahead of him yet, but in the distance the sound of a siren made him break into a run. Quite a distance before him, at one side of the track, he could see an object. Yes, a prone body. His feet bit into the sandy ground to make speed, and he soon came up to it. A hurried examination showed it to be Tommy, bruised and unconscious. As the detective picked the boy up and headed toward his car, the first of the police cars halted at the corner of 8th Street. The officers had noticed the man on the tracks and hurried down to meet him. "You're a little late," said the detective. "I have the boy." "Better turn him over to us. We're officers of the law." "I'm handling this case," replied the detective, knowing his rights. "I don't want to put the boy down to show you my credentials, but if you'll come along with me to my car, I'll oblige you." The police were nettled, but they followed along behind the man until he had put Tommy into his car. Then he pulled out his billfold and produced his identification card. They thereupon grudgingly allowed him to pursue his way to the hospital. A little later an ambulance passed him, but the detective paid no attention to it and sped along as fast as the law would allow. A careful examination at the hospital showed that Tommy had sustained a broken right arm, several severe lacerations, and possibly a fractured skull. "If only he would come to, doctor," said the nurse in genuine alarm. "We'll just have to wait. Things like this can't be rushed." "I'm going to the office to call the boy's guardian," said the detective. "Please don't let anyone in to see the boy while I'm away." The detective made his way to the office of the hospital and called Kensington. The conversation was very short. "Do you know Mr. Basil Kensington of Washington Irving Academy?" asked the detective of the nurse at the desk. "Very well indeed, sir." "Well, he'll be here in a short time. When he comes, please bring him to room 103. I'll be waiting for him there." And he made off down to Tommy's room once more. "He has not come to yet," said the nurse by way of breaking the silence. "That's a very ugly wound on the back of his head. He must have fallen off the train," said the doctor. "I'm sure I don't know, doctor," replied the detective. "I have called the boy's guardian, Basil Kensington of the Academy. You know him, I presume?" "I'm his doctor." "That's good. He will be here soon." "So the boy's from the Academy?" "I'd better let Mr. Kensington do the talking, doctor," answered the detective with professional caution. In a short time Mr. Kensington entered the room, his normal calm entirely missing. "How's the boy, doctor?" "In a bad shape, I'm afraid, Kensington. He has not come to yet. I have set his right arm and attended to the cuts. It's that bump on the back of his head that's worrying me. When he regains consciousness, we may find out something more about things." "Do you really think it is serious, doctor?" "There is a possibility of a fractured skull. I don't want to alarm you unduly, but it seems to me that the boy's parents should be informed." "That's what I'm worried about. I thought that if you felt the case not too serious, I would not bother to get in touch with his father." "Well, it certainly is serious. I wouldn't want to have the entire responsibility on my shoulders if I were you, Kensington." I see. I see. It's not so easy to get hold of the boy's father. He travels quite a bit. but I'll notify his office. You feel there's nothing more that you can do at the present time, doctor?" "Not a thing, sir. I will leave the nurse with the boy. She'll call me just as soon as anything new develops. I have several other calls to make this morning here in the hospital, and I'll be back before noon. Do you intend to stay here?" "Yes, doctor. I'll wait until you return." Kensington pulled up a chair close to the bed and sat for a long moment looking at the patient. Then he got up and paced back and forth. Soon he came back to the nurse. "Has anyone seen the boy?" "No one but the doctor, the detective, and the nurses here in the hospital." "That's all I want to know. Don't let anyone in to see him without my permission. I'm going to put in a call for his father." The principal was a very worried man. It was the first time in the history of his school that such a thing had happened. Also, he rather feared the meeting with the senior Blake. About half an hour later, Tommy opened his eyes. He gazed about him, much as anyone does when first coming out of ether. "Tommy, Tommy, do you hear me?" questioned the nurse. But Tommy gave no answer. He was too profoundly exhausted. In another moment he closed his eyes again and was off to sleep. "He opened his eyes for a moment, sir," said the nurse as Kensington returned to the room. "I tried to get him to talk, but he didn't hear me." "I'm quite worried about the boy," confessed the principal. "I am sure you are, sir, but everything has been done that is possible, you know. People sometimes remain unconscious for hours with a bump like that," she said, trying to quiet the nervous man. "Here's the doctor." "How's the patient, nurse?" was the physician's first question as he approached the bed. "He opened his eyes for a moment, doctor, but he didn't say anything. He wasn't really conscious." "He's moving a little now, doctor," said Kensington. The doctor bent over the patient. "Tommy, Tommy, do you hear me?" A slight moan escaped from the boy's lips, but that was all. "There is nothing further I can do, Kensington. I will go along to my office. If there is any change, nurse, please call me." And so saying, the doctor left. "Don't doctors usually stay with their patients until they revive?" questioned the principal. "Not always, sir. In a case like this there is nothing that the doctor can do. The boy has no fever at present. You can go too if you wish, sir. I will be here, and I can call you if it becomes necessary. He may not revive for hours yet." Kensington could feel that he was not wanted, so he made up his mind to go home. "I'm to be downtown about 2 o'clock," he told the nurse as he departed, "and I'll come in again at that time." For more than an hour the nurse sat watching her charge. Suddenly Tommy moved his arms. That was one of the few signs of life he had displayed since he had been laid on the hospital bed. "Tommy," said the nurse. His eyes flickered. "Tommy," she repeated, and patted him lightly on the cheek. Tommy opened his eyes and looked up at her, but the vagueness in his gaze told her that he was not yet fully conscious. His lids seemed about to sink once more, but suddenly complete awareness asserted itself. His eyes regarded her with normal directness, and he asked, "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital, Tommy." A quiver as of intense pain shook through him, and he moved his left hand up to his head. "You've got quite a bump there, Tommy." But Tommy had dropped off again into an unconscious state. The nurse patiently sat down to wait for him to awaken once more. At the promised hour Kensington returned. "Has he regained consciousness yet?" "Just for a moment, sir." "Strange." "No, it's not strange, sir. But I do think he will soon come to for good." "I have word from his father, who will arrive in the city late tomorrow afternoon. I do hope Tommy will be able to talk to him so we can get the story of the accident." "He'll come out of it before sundown, sir. At least I feel that way about it." "Then you don't think I need to wait?" "No, sir." So Kensington left the hospital again. Here was one place where he was not supreme. Just before 6 o'clock that night, Tommy verified the nurse's prophetic powers by coming back once more to the land of reality. "You're a great sleeper," said the nurse half jokingly, to get him to feel at ease. "What has happened to me?" Tommy asked, noticing for the first time that his arm was in a cast. "You have had an accident, my boy." "An accident? Oh, my head!" Can you tell me how you got down to the railroad tracks, Tommy? They found you quite a distance from town, lying beside the rails. Come, tell me about it. I'm your friend. I won't tell on you." "I tried to run away from school. I want to get home to my mother. Does Kensington know that I am here?" "Yes, he does. He has been here twice since you were brought in this morning, and your father will get here tomorrow evening." "Did they say anything about my mother?" "Not a word, Tommy. Where is your mother?" "I don't know for sure. We used to live in New York. Then for a time we lived in Lawson. I've got to get to my mother. I don't want to stay here." "But you must remain in bed for a while, Tommy. You have been badly hurt." "How long will I have to stay here?" "That all depends upon how soon you get well, my lad. You have a bad bump on your head and your right arm is broken." "How long does it take to heal a broken arm?" "About 5 or 6 weeks for a strong fellow like you." "5 or 6 weeks! And will I have to stay here all that time?" "Perhaps not. We will know better a little later. I wouldn't worry about it now." "But my head aches so." "You just lie still now and I'll go for more ice. Most of this is melted already." No sooner had the nurse closed the door behind her than Tommy made up his mind to try to escape once more. He picked up the broken arm with the good one, shoved his feet over the side of the bed, got onto them, swayed one brief moment, and then dropped into a heap on the floor. When the nurse returned and saw him thus crumpled in a dead faint, she immediately ran for help. The doctor feared that the fall might have dislocated the bones in the broken arm. An X-ray dispelled that fear, but the shock from the fall had had its own effects. For more than an hour the boy remained in a complete stupor. When, late that night, he again recognized his surroundings, he found the doctor and the nurse standing over him. "I'm very disappointed in you, my boy," said the doctor. "I don't care whether you are or not. I want to get out of this place. Get my mother to come here. You have sent for my father. I don't want him to come. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here." "Will you tell me about it, Tommy?" soothed the doctor. "Yes. I have to stay at the Academy. My dad put me there and he never comes around. My mother doesn't know I am there. He wouldn't even let me write to her. He doesn't care for my mother because she is a Catholic. Are you a Catholic, Doctor?" "No, I am not. I didn't know that Catholics were allowed to go to the Academy." "Well, I'm a Catholic. It seems people can do just about what they want when they have money. My father got me into the Academy. My father is not a Catholic, and he doesn't want me to be one either. That is the reason why he put me there. I got sick and tired of being there, so when it got dark last night, I beat it. I made for the railroad tracks. I kept away from the center of town so I wouldn't get caught. I tried to get on several trains, but it was no use. They were going too fast. Finally one came along this morning that looked slower than the rest, and I made a grab for it. I held on and tried hard to pull up my feet onto the ladder, but I couldn't make it. I looked down and got dizzy, and then I don't know what happened." "Well, from there on I can take up the story. You were noticed by an engineer, word was sent in by radio, and a private detective found you. But I'm surprised, Tommy, that you try to run away from the hospital. You should never have done that. You are in a bad condition right now." "Oh, I just don't care, Doctor. Anything would be better than to be at the Academy." "Now, please try to rest, Tommy. You're going to put in some tough hours when the reaction to those bumps and broken bones sets in. And listen, you must promise me that you won't try to escape from the hospital. Will you do that?" "Of course he'll not try to escape." The doctor turned to confront Kensington, who had just entered. "Now listen, Basil. You leave the boy to me. He's under my care as long as he is here, and I think we'll get along well together." Kensington stood for a moment stunned. "Yes, go on home," burst from Tommy's lips. "I don't want to see—" "Tommy, Tommy, I don't want you to talk that way to Mr. Kensington," said the doctor, giving the boy a wink on the side opposite to the principal. The latter, feeling the indignity cast upon him, picked up his hat and left the room. "He'll tell your dad on you when he gets here." "I don't care if he does." Well, I'm going to leave you in charge of the nurse now. Be a good boy and stay in bed. I'll call on you in the morning." "I won't try to run away, Doctor. I give you my word." Tommy put in a bad night, and the next morning when the doctor called, he found him in great pain. "I'm aching all over today, Doctor," said the boy through feverish lips. "I knew you would be, but I'll give you a little something to ease that for a while. Here, drink this." The draught was soothing, and Tommy soon went off to sleep. When he awoke a few hours later, his father stood beside the bed. At first Tommy did not seem to recognize him. "Well, Tommy, don't you know me?" "Yes, Dad." There was coldness in that voice, although Tommy reached out his hand to shake hands with his father. "How do you feel?" "Miserable." "It seems like you're not at all anxious to see me, Tommy." "Well, I can't help it." "What do you mean, you can't help it?" "I mean just that. I can't help that I don't feel anxious to see you. You didn't come at Christmas time. You never let—" "Now, Tommy," cut in Blake to prevent the boy from talking about his mother, "you know how busy I am." "Busy, busy! You're always busy. If you'd take a little time out to try to make things homelike for me and for Mother, you'd be much better off. I know you don't want me to talk about her, but I'm going to talk about her just the same. And if I get a chance to run away and find her, I'm going to do it." There was defiance in Tommy's eyes and in his voice. It was a new and unwelcome experience for Blake. He had never noticed this element in his son's makeup before. "Well, I'm certainly surprised at you, Tommy. Here I made this long trip because I felt you really wanted me. Kensington told me you were in a very serious condition." "He is in a serious condition, Mr. Blake," said the nurse. "He was unconscious for several hours yesterday. I really don't think he's quite as bad a boy as he is trying to appear at present." But these tactful words did not soothe Tommy's spirit. "You'll let us talk together for a while by ourselves, nurse?" "Certainly, sir. Just call me before you leave." As soon as the door closed behind her, Blake began the effort to break down Tommy's resistance, but though he said a good deal, he did not succeed. "I don't want to appear ugly, Dad, but it seems that I do appear that way to you. I'm just unhappy. I hate it here. You have done everything for me that you think is right, but I see things in a different way." "Well, I'm sorry it has to be that way, Tommy. But I'll be leaving tomorrow. I have a rush trip to Brooklyn. Now I want you to promise that you will not try to run away again. It will soon be vacation time. June will be here before you know it. Then we'll plan some good times. I trust in you. I know that if you promise me not to run away from the Academy, you'll keep that promise. Think it over and let me know in the morning." "I won't need to wait until the morning. I'll not promise that I won't try to run away." End of chapter 5. Six of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tommy Goes Vacationing. Even before commencement time came around at Washington Irving Academy, Tommy was sure that he would have to join the crowd of about a dozen students who were to spend the summer at Villa of the Cliffs, Mr. Kensington's summer camp. A letter had arrived from his father stating that it was necessary for him to leave the boy there, as business called him to Europe. "You'll like it at the Villa," said Clifton DeVere, a millionaire's son who was not wanted at home because he was a reminder of other days. "I have spent 2 summers there, and it's great. The villa is in the mountains. There are fine lakes where we can swim, and there are wonderful trails along which we ride. You'll like it, Tom." But Tommy was not enthusiastic. Byron Mullen was not to be there, having planned to go to a little camp of his own, hundreds of miles away. His new book, Dark Paradise, was taking form, and he must work at it. However, he had promised to write Tommy often during the summer. "How far is the villa from the nearest town?" asked Tommy. "Gee, I don't know. I know we ride miles through the country after we get off the train. We never go back to Cliffville. That's the town, once we're at the villa." "Never go to town. Don't you go to movies or to shows?" We have our own movies at the villa. They always have good ones." And then things moved along quietly until, a few days after commencement, Tommy and his friends found themselves on their way to the summer camp. For a time Tommy felt an interest in the villa. Everything was new to him. The boys slept until 7 o'clock every morning and then went down to the lake for a swim. Breakfast was served at 8, and then the remainder of the morning was spent in hikes, horseback riding, or some other sport. About a mile from the villa the mountains began a rather rapid rise, their bases heavily wooded, but the slopes above standing out in clear rock, defying the elements. Trails wound up into them, and these the boys loved to follow. One day Tommy and Crawford Simpson made up their minds to start out early and try to go beyond the regular marked trails, feeling that exploration would be even more interesting. "We won't tell any of the others," they agreed. "They might tell Kensington, and perhaps he would forbid us to go." So the two started out on their new venture. They hurried along the familiar paths, which no longer held anything new for them, no caves to explore, no difficult climbs to make. "Here's where the fun begins," said Tommy as they left the last rest house on the trail. "Now we'll be real mountain climbers. Let's try to go as straight up from here as possible. We'll use the top of this hut as a landmark. We don't want to get lost." "You can't get lost in these mountains," said Crawford. "They say you can see our lake from any point on this side. There's a ledge. Let's try to get out on that. Take hold of that root and pull yourself up. That's the way. You'll get a dandy look at the country from there." "Were you ever up there, Crawford?" asked Tommy. "No, but I'll be up there in a minute, and I'm going higher too. We're only about 100 feet above the rest house. We've got to go higher. See that big rock projecting out over there? I bet there is a cave under it. I'd like to get inside a real cave." The boys found it a steep climb to the rock. Interesting from below, it was even more interesting when they reached it. Tommy was now straining to get a grip on the top of the stone. As soon as his fingers took hold, he realized that the piece he held to was the apex of what was perhaps a great stone triangle. Just what there would be on the other side he did not know. He must pull himself up and straddle this rock before he could tell. It was quite a job to draw himself up, but he was making it when suddenly he moved a bit too fast, lost his grip, and was soon sliding down the other side of the rock into what was worse than a cave, for this great mouth into which he fell rose up on all sides and almost perpendicular 15 feet. Tommy hit the bottom with a terrible jolt. Had he fallen straight down into the basin, he might have been killed. As it was, his descent rather resembled a rapid sliding down than a real fall. But even at that he lay there for a time partially dazed. Soon he saw the face of Crawford looking down at him from the rim of the bowl in which he lay. Crawford had not tried to straddle the rock as Tommy had done. Instead he had taken hold with both hands and had drawn himself up far enough to see what was ahead. "Be careful! You'll fall!" came Tommy's voice from what sounded a great distance. Tommy was on his feet now and able to appreciate the surroundings. Crawford saw him in the center of the pit, a mere midget compared to the height of the rocks above him. "How am I to get out of here? There's nothing for me to hold on to," were Tommy's next words. "Gee, I don't know, Tom. I guess I'll have to go back to the villa and get a long rope. You'll have to be pulled out." "Do you think we can get a rope?" "I know where one is, but I'll have to get someone who can pull you out. And I'll have to get going too. It's after 1 already. It will be getting dark by the time we get back. You aren't scared, are you, Tommy?" "No, I'm not afraid. But don't let Kensington know about it, or he won't let us come out again. Go to the kitchen and try to get old Bill Dolan to come. He's a good friend of mine, and he's plenty strong. And hurry, will you?" Soon Crawford was making his way down the rocks towards the rest house, but it was not easy going back down. Coming up for some reason hadn't seemed so difficult. It was just 3 o'clock when Crawford arrived at the deserted rest house. From there to the villa meant another 2 hours, and that would bring him to the kitchen at old Bill's busiest time. He would be hard at work preparing the supper for the hungry lads who would be coming in from all directions at that time. When Crawford struck the marked trails, he hurried on as fast as he could. It was just 10 minutes after 5 when he reached the stone arch which marked the entrance to the villa grounds. From that point on he must walk along leisurely, so as not to attract special attention. The other boys must not know what had happened. In the kitchen, Crawford found Old Bill mopping the perspiration from his dark red face, a face which seemed almost like raw meat when compared with the whiteness of his cook's trousers and jacket. "And what are you doing here at this time of day, my boy?" "Not so loud, Bill. I'm in trouble. Do you think you could help me?" "Well," said Bill, piping down to half wind, "that all depends. What's biting you now?" Crawford looked all around to see whether or not anyone else were within hearing. "You see, Tommy Blake and I went out mountain climbing this morning." "Yes?" broke in Bill. "And we climbed pretty high." "Yes, go on." "Well, Tommy fell down into a hole." Bill stood speechless for a short moment, then words returned to him. "Is he dead?" "No, Bill, he isn't dead. He isn't even hurt. But he can't get out. That's why I came to you. I don't want to tell Kensington about it, and I don't want anyone else to know about it. Now, will you go with me to get him out?" "But, my lad, I have to have supper ready in a few minutes, you know. It will be 7 o'clock before I can get out of here. But there are some things in our favor. Kensington has gone to the city and won't be back till late tonight." "Gee, that's fine," said Crawford, a little color coming back into his pale cheeks. "I tell you what to do, boy. You just go in with the others and have your supper. If they ask any questions about Tommy, don't pay any attention to them. They might think he has gone with Kensington. Then just as soon as we can, after that, we will go for him. How does that suit you?" "That will be fine, Bill. Do you think you can get a long rope? It would take more than 20 feet of rope to reach where Tommy is." "Now you just leave all that to me. I'll take care of everything. You go ahead now and get washed up for supper. Come around here for me after your meal is over." With that Crawford was off to his room. Out in the mountains, miles away, the hours were dragging for Tommy. Just the least suggestion of dusk was creeping into the pit where he sat. It was extremely quiet. Not so much as the sound of a bird interrupted the vast silence. There Tommy sat thinking over the many happenings that already marked his young life, and he came to the conclusion that most of the unpleasant things were due to the fact that his mother had married an atheist. He remembered what his religion teachers had told him about such marriages. Each fact had gone home with great force for him. He had lived through what they described. But these thoughts did not turn Tommy against his mother. Though realizing fully that she had taken a bad step in marrying a non-Catholic, he knew that she had always remained true to her religion and had done everything in her power to have him brought up as a Catholic. Where was his mother now? The oft-recurring question almost overwhelmed him in his solitude. He could not bear to think that she was suffering because of him. And where was his father? Why had he looked so thin and pale at their last meeting? Tommy had never seen him that way before. Moreover, there had not been the usual haughty way about him, the typical trait of the Blakes. Something must be radically wrong. He must be ill. If only his mother knew of it, she might perhaps come back to him. She would see to it that he went to one of the several country homes which Tommy knew his father owned, to rest and regain his lost strength. Everything that was wanted or needed could be had. Money meant nothing to Mr. Blake. The best doctors and nurses could be brought, to live under the same roof with him until he should be fully recovered. If only he, Tommy, could get away, find his mother, all would be well. Meanwhile, time was not waiting for the rescuers. Dusk came and intensified into night. From the bottom of the pit, Tommy looked straight up into the blue black of the sky. The silence seemed to fill the universe. Stars came out to keep him company. If only he could sleep. But there were too many thoughts flashing through his head to permit him to relax. He began also to wonder about his own continued safety. Would the night bring forth the wild animals from their haunts? Would Crawford be able to get back to him? Had he been able to make his own way down the rocks to the villa? What would Kensington do? While Tommy was asking himself these questions, Crawford and Bill were toiling up the mountain trail. Bill had a large coil of rope and Crawford carried 2 lanterns. They had gone out through the back of the camp to avoid being seen by any of the boys, and they were now hurrying along as fast as they could, Crawford leading the way. After some time at this forced pace, the miles began to seem longer and longer to the rescuers. It was getting late and both were tired. But they must go on. Tommy was waiting for them. The ascent of the mountain was especially hard on old Bill. Through the years he had acquired an unusual thickness of waistline, for which he blamed his profession. He never could be made to admit, despite the jokes of many of his friends, that he was a big eater. At last the rest house was reached. "We'll have to sit down here a while, Dad. I simply must rest. This climbing will be the death of me." "Yes, do sit down, Bill. I'll call to Tommy so that he will know we are coming. It won't do any harm, will it, Bill?" "No, go right ahead. No one's out here to be disturbed. And he'll hear you, too, for sound carries far when it is as still as this. It'll certainly pep him up, so make it good and loud." With that Crawford let out a yell that reverberated through the vast silence. Both strained to hear the answer, and the answer came clear but very faint. However, it was enough. They felt renewed energy for going on. "Now, from here on," put in Crawford, "you'll have a hard time, Bill. We have to go almost straight up. It is even worse now than this morning. Then I didn't have to bother with a lantern. But we never get there without the light, Bill." "You go ahead now, lad. I'll follow you the best I can. I'm no mountain climber, but we'll get there," he added, though his voice seemed to echo the doubt in his mind. For the first time in his life he wished he hadn't such a fondness for his own cooking. But it was too late to worry about that now. "Hold still a minute, Bill, and look up. See that rock up there, almost at the top of the ray of light from the lantern? That's where we have to go. Tommy's down behind that rock." Old Bill sighed. He was beginning to wonder whether he could possibly make it. The projections on the side of the mountain were so narrow. But he must not let his partner know of his doubts. "I think I will stay here and hold up my lantern so you can see better, Bill. What do you say?" "That's a good idea. You say the pit is just on the other side?" "Yes, Bill. As soon as you get hold of the edge of that rock above your head, you will be able to pull yourself straight up to the rim of the pit. Go at it easy when you try to straddle that rock. If Tommy had not been so fast at it, he wouldn't have slipped over. Remember, the shape of the stone is like a big triangle. The top of it is very thin." "I'll see what I can do with it. Keep out from below. I might fall." "You better not." Bill followed the directions very carefully. It was a big job for him to pull himself up to that edge above, but he made it. For a long moment he paused to get his breath. He was puffing too much to be able to talk at once, but he did not keep Tommy waiting any longer than was necessary. "Are you awake, Tom?" he called down into the blackness of the pit. "Yes, I'm awake. Who's there? Is that you, Crawford?" "This is Bill Dolan. Crawford's here too. Just a minute now. I must get my lantern." Crawford tied one of the lanterns to the rope that Bill let down to him. Bill then carefully drew it up to where he sat, and then let it down into the pit where Tommy now stood, patiently awaiting rescue. As the rays of the lantern lit up the steep, rocky wall, Bill fully realized how impossible it would be for anyone to get out without the aid of a rope from above. When the lantern came to a stop at the bottom of the pit near Tommy, Bill called to him again. "Tie the rope around your waist as well as you can, Tommy. Make several knots in it. Then take hold of it with your hands and I'll pull you up. Let me know as soon as you are ready." He watched Tommy carry out his instructions in the little pool of light far below. When the boy was ready, Bill called down to him: "Don't bother about the lantern. We'll just leave it there. Hold on tight now, and don't be scared. Brace your feet against the rock so you won't get scratched. Steady now." With that, Bill began to pull on his rope. The job was almost too much for him. He had to keep his balance on the top of the rock and at the same time pull up a weight of close to 100 pounds. But he went on pulling, hand over hand, and each vigorous tug brought Tommy nearer to the top of the cliff. "Hold on tight, boy. You're getting pretty close. Is it hurting ya?" "Pull right ahead, Bill. I'm all right." Soon Tommy was able to catch hold of the top of the rock, but precautions were more than ever necessary to prevent him from falling. There were a few breathless moments for Bill and Tommy, but they were soon over, and Tommy felt himself firmly seated, trying to get his breath. "That's the hardest thing I've done in years, boy." "I'm very grateful to you, Bill, for getting me out. Does Kensington know that you came for me?" "No, Tommy. He wasn't home when we left. I hope we can make it back before he gets there. We have a long drag ahead of us, so just as soon as you can start, let me know. I wouldn't want to have any words with the boss, you know." "Well, let's go right away, Bill. I know you are very tired, and I'm sorry I caused you all this trouble." "Now, don't be bothering about that, my boy. There's Crawford down there with the lantern. Make your way down. Go easy, now. Watch your step. I'll follow you." Slowly the two worked themselves down the face of the rock to where Crawford sat holding his lantern. "I guess you thought we were never coming, Tommy, but it was a long way, and I was really very tired. More than once I felt like sitting down." "I knew you'd come back, Crawford, and I'm thankful to you for getting Bill to come with you. It wasn't much fun staying down in there all that time. Some wild animals might have come, and what could I have done? I sang songs and whistled to scare anything away. But let's hurry now. We want to try to get home before Kensington does, and it's a long way home." "We'll try not to go too fast for you, Bill. We know you're very tired after your hard work." "Don't be minding me, lads. I'll keep up with you." The three pushed on down the trail as fast as their tired bodies could move. In spite of the fact that the boys were in the habit of taking long walks, they had never been put to the strain they had endured today. The moon was up now and gave them light for their trip home, so the lantern was extinguished. Not only because they were able to dispense with it, but also because they wished to avoid attracting attention. If they could get in unobserved, all would be well. Long after midnight the travelers passed under the stone arch at the entrance to the villa property. There they paused and listened carefully. Basil Kensington might be around looking for them, or he might even have the sheriff on their trail. Kensington always acted quickly when there was a possibility of trouble. There was not a light to be seen anywhere, so there was no way for the boys to find out at present whether anyone had known of their escapade or not. "I'll take the rope down to the barn. You go right along up to the front of the villa. I have the key to the kitchen. I'll go in there, come through to the front of the house, and if the door is locked, I'll let you in. Be as quiet as you can." "I want to thank you, Bill, for your kindness to me." "Now, forget about that and get along. It's late, you know." Bill left them at once. The boys continued their way up to the front as they had been told. Tom had just put his hand on the doorknob when a familiar voice out of the silence chilled them, not only by its unexpectedness, but also by its tone. Basil Kensington's greeting was brief and cold. "Go to bed now. I'll take care of you in the morning." End of chapter 6. Seven of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Trouble ahead. The following morning before the boys left the dining room, Basil Kensington announced that he wished to see Thomas Blake and Crawford Simpson in his office at 8:30. His words created a stir among the boys. Few, if any, knew of the episode of the previous day, and it was unusual for Kensington to call for boys in that way, unless the reason for it bore upon a problem of discipline or something of an equally serious nature. His announcement was bound to set the camp to speculating on the nature of the trouble. Tom and Crawford had their own thoughts. It was their first offense, and they did not know exactly what to expect. But they were ready when the time came for them to be ushered into Kensington's office. "I am interested to know where you boys were until such a late hour last evening. You know, of course, that this is a very serious matter." There was a long moment of silence. Kensington drew his spectacles from their case, wiped them, and perched them upon the arch of his long, sharp nose. Neither of the boys was willing to begin the story. "I'll ask you to answer my question, Thomas Blake." Since the question had been put directly to him, Tommy was quite willing to reply. This he did, making the story as clear and as brief as he could. He was careful not to mention old Bill Dolan in it. Kensington might be more than harsh with Bill. After telling about his fall into the pit, Tommy added simply, "I had great difficulty, sir, in getting out." "So you had great difficulty in getting out?" "Yes, sir, I did." "And just where was this pit? I have not heard of it before." "It is up in the mountains, sir." "No doubt. Is it beyond the marked trails?" "Yes, sir." "And had you permission to disregard the school law in this matter?" "No, sir." "And you knew the law about going beyond them, didn't you?" "Yes, sir." "Very well. Since you have openly disregarded my orders, you both will have to be punished severely. The gravity of the situation is such that I should send you away from the school at once, but since other circumstances make that quite impossible, I shall have to do the next best thing. You will not leave the grounds for a week. That will be all. You may go." Not a word escaped from the two boys while they were making their way out of the office and down the hall to the yard. Then Tommy spoke. "Let's go down to the lake. That's still the grounds. He only means that we can't leave the school property." "I don't care what he means," answered Crawford. "I'm going to run away. I'm sick and tired of this place, and I never did like him. He's just an old fossil. I doubt if he ever was young himself. Or maybe it was so long ago that he can't remember anything about it." It was the first time that Tommy had heard any of the boys talk in this way. It started some new thoughts in him. He had never before thought of running away from the villa, but now the idea took hold of him. After all, he felt, the world was a big place. "Where would you go, Crawford?" "Not so loud. Someone might hear us. Let's sit down and figure it out." "Do you know how to get back to town?" "Sure, that's easy. There's only one road." "Have you any money with you?" "Not a cent. It's all in the office." "But we need some money." "No, we can get along without it for a while. Later on, when we get far enough away, we'll try to get a job." "We might just as well get away tonight, don't you think?" "It suits me." "The best thing to do," mused Tommy, warming to the idea, "would be to slip off when the others go down for the evening dip in the lake. Kensington usually goes with them. We'll get the things together that we want to take with us, and just as soon as the others leave for the lake, we'll beat it." "I'm willing to try it, boy," agreed Crawford enthusiastically. "Shake hands then. We'll go tonight." For the remainder of that day everything worked out well. When the time came for the evening swim, Tommy and Crawford were fully prepared. At 8 o'clock Kensington and Burton Gilson, the only teacher at the villa, rose from their seats on the porch and made their way leisurely down the walk toward the lake. Immediately the lads who were to share the dip fell into groups and followed. Since it was not obligatory for anyone to go, no special attention was paid to the members of the party. The teachers were mainly to act as lifeguards in case of accident. While the others were making their way down the front path to the lake, Tommy and Crawford were hurrying through the fields at the rear of the villa. They wanted to put as much distance between themselves and the school as they possibly could before they were missed, for they knew that discovery would not be long postponed. Kensington had a way of finding things out very soon. It was getting dark rapidly now, but the two tried not to slacken their pace. It was not easy to make headway through the tall grass of the fields, even in the daytime, and now that it was getting dark, the task was every moment becoming more difficult. "Hadn't we better get out on the road now, so we can make some better time?" asked Crawford. "If you think so, I'll be glad to agree. I'm getting very tired here." So the two made their way up to the winding country road, a dun-colored ribbon stretching off into the distance. No sound broke upon their ears but the noise of insects in grass and trees. "Don't you wish an auto or something would pass once in a while, Crawford?" "It might not be safe. Keep in close to the edge of the road, Tommy. We mustn't let anyone see us." "No one can see us out here, can they? No one lives around here." "Oh, yes, they do. There are a lot of small lakes around here, and there are many fine summer homes, too. You should see this place in the daytime. I have been past here many times and have met some of the people, too. Wealthy people, mostly, from New York, New Jersey, Washington, and Maryland. They come here for the summer." "Do you think they would tell on us if they saw us?" "I don't know, but I'm not going to give them a chance." Then for quite a while the boys trudged along in silence, the mind of each busy with the new venture. "There's a light over that way," observed Tommy suddenly. "It looks like a reflection on water." "Yes, that's from one of the cottages. If it wasn't for the cottages, there wouldn't be such good roads along here. My father told me he had a fine cottage on a lake, Crawford, but he said it was miles and miles away from Washington Irving Academy." "Well, we're over 200 miles from there now, Tommy. You know we spent a long time on the train when we came down here from the Academy." "That's right. Gee, Crawford, I'm getting very tired and sleepy. Where will we stay tonight?" "Well, if we get too tired, we'll just have to lie down under a tree or something." "Under a tree? Don't you think we had better get into a barn? I don't care about lying out in the open." "But where will we find a barn? People who are running away don't look for barns." Just then the boys passed the stone arch marking the entrance to an estate. Lights in the distance caught their gaze. They stopped near the great stone pillars and looked down the avenue of trees. It was very inviting. "Perhaps we could find some place back in there, Tommy." "No, you don't find any place back in there," said a gruff voice out of the darkness. "You're going right back with me to the villa. I'm the sheriff. I'm glad I found you this early. Kensington called and told me you were running away. So get into that auto there and I'll take you back where you belong." The boys were so surprised by the suddenness of their capture that they could say nothing, nor was the officer of the law in a talkative mood. He got into the machine after them, silently drove it back down the road from where they had come, and deposited the two runaways in the office of Basil Kensington. "I'll see you in the morning, Mr. Kensington. I have another little job on right now." Then the officer was gone, leaving the two to their fate. Kensington turned his gaze upon them. "Young men, I find that I must use severe methods with you. This is your second offense. You will spend the next week locked up. Come with me." Wasting no more words, he led the two boys down the hall to a part of the building they had never been in before. At the extreme end of the corridor he stopped, took out a bunch of keys, and unlocked a door. "Go in." Upon obeying this curt order, the boys found themselves in a sort of ward. There were 3 beds along the wall, a table in the center of the room, some chairs, and a few other simple furnishings. "You will notice that the windows are fixed so that you cannot get out. Your meals will be brought to you here. Everything that you need for your comfort is here, but you will not be allowed out of this room until I feel satisfied that you have learned your lesson. It grieves me to have to do this, boys, but you have brought the punishment upon yourselves." Thereupon Basil Kensington withdrew, leaving the two to themselves. "This is some coup, Tommy. What do you think of it?" "It's the first time I've ever been in jail," replied Tommy in a very dejected manner. "They certainly have that wire well fixed on these windows. Let's see what we can find in these closets. Oh, look here, Crawford. Here are a lot of fine books. This is a good one. The Story of a Bad Boy. Have you read it?" "No, and I don't intend to read it. I suppose he thought that would teach us something." "Well, how about The Last Days of Pompeii?" "I don't want any of them, Tommy. They can't amount to much, or Kensington wouldn't have them here in jail." "I like some of them, Crawford. I've read most of them, but I'm going to read Treasure Island over again." "No reading for me tonight. I'm going to bed." Tommy soon found that he, too, was heavy-eyed. Even Treasure Island could not keep him awake. In a few minutes both of the lads were sound asleep. Let tomorrow take care of itself. Breakfast was brought into the jail on the following morning. With the waiter came Kensington, who saw that the tray had on it everything that the boys needed, and then withdrew, locking the door after him. "Well, these are good meals for jailbirds, aren't they?" "Not bad at all, Crawford, but I'd rather be out of here. Too bad we got caught." "I wonder whether he'll give us our mail if we get any, Tommy." "Sure, he'll give you yours. I'm not expecting any. I had one yesterday from one of my father's secretaries, postmarked New York. It said that he was not very well." "Well, I haven't had a letter for quite a while." Presently the conversation gave way to the enjoyment of a good breakfast. 15 minutes later the boys were attracted by the sound of an automobile. It was unusual for a car to pull up at the villa so early in the morning, and they ran to the window, which looked out on the drive, to see who was coming. "It's a special delivery man, Tommy." "Well, I hope it's for me. I want to get out of this place. I wrote to Byron Mullen telling him that I hate the villa. I wonder what he'd say if he knew I was in jail." Just then there was a sound of someone coming down the corridor toward their room. They heard the rattle of keys, the unlocking of the door, and presently Kensington stood before them, holding a letter in his hand. "This special delivery is for you, Crawford. Read it and let me know if there is anything in it that I should know." Crawford hurriedly tore open the envelope, ran his eyes over the first few lines, and then read aloud: "We have just decided to go to Europe and we want you to go with us. Tell Mr. Kensington to have all of your things packed up and make the first train possible to the Grand Central Station in New York. We will meet you there. Have him wire the exact time you will arrive." Crawford looked up at Kensington, who at that moment was looking at his watch. "The next train leaves the village for New York in 3 hours and 20 minutes. We can have everything ready by that time. Come with me." "Goodbye, Tommy. I hate to leave you." The boys shook hands while Basil held the door open for Crawford. Then he left. The door was closed, and with a heavy heart Tom heard the key turn in the lock. Would he have to spend the remainder of the week in jail all by himself? That was the first thought that came to him. Dinner was served to Tommy in much the same manner as his breakfast had been, but when Kensington returned with a waiter after half an hour, he found that the meal had not been touched. Tommy was sitting in a chair beside one of the windows with his head resting on the sill. "You have not eaten your dinner, Thomas," said Basil Kensington in his driest voice. "I do not care for any, sir," replied Tommy without looking toward the master. "Are you sure, Thomas?" "Yes, sir." "Take the tray away." Tommy hoped that Kensington would leave without delay, but he was disappointed. The master closed the door and then seated himself in a chair near the boy. "I am sure that your father will be very displeased when he hears of your conduct, my boy." "If my father thought very much of me, he wouldn't have me here. I have a right to a happy home, and that he has not given me." "Your father has done everything in his power to make you happy." "He has been to see me only once since I came to the Academy, and he wouldn't have come then but for the fact that he was sent for. He has taken me away from my mother and put me here in this place. Is that trying to make me happy, sir?" "You know that your father has not been well for some little time, Thomas. That's why he hasn't been here to see you." Tommy said no more, realizing that it would be useless, and Basil Kensington realized that he had lost his point. In his heart he agreed with the boy, but he could not let him know that. He merely changed the topic of the discussion, sensing that further words would be of no avail. "You may go out with the other boys, Thomas," was his next speech. Tommy left the jail, but he did not go to find any of the other lads. Instead he made his way to his own room. Besides Crawford, there was no one in the group that he really cared for, so for the time being he was resolved to avoid their company. Once he was back in his room, thoughts again crowded into his head. Why should he stay in this place? He had failed once to get away from it, but that was no sign he would fail again. Yes, Tommy meant to try. He would not leave tonight, however, for he felt that he perhaps would be under observation for a while. 2 nights later came the opportunity. Shortly after the boys had gone to bed, a violent electrical storm arose which kept everyone awake for a long time. The winds blew a terrific gale, and rain beat against the windows in heavy sheets. Some of the younger boys were frightened so much that it became necessary for Kensington to get them together in a room and stay there with them until the storm abated somewhat. At about 10 o'clock things were quieting down to normal. The boys, tired out from their day of hiking and swimming and kept from sleep by the storm, were glad to settle down for the night. Even Basil Kensington's eyes were unusually heavy. At a greater and greater distance the thunder still rumbled. Now was Tommy's chance. He got up, dressed quietly, and with his shoes held tightly under his arm, made his way down to the first floor. He found the door locked, but succeeded in getting out through a small artistic window which, because of its unusual design, had no screen on it. Now he would leave this hated place, and if it was at all possible, gain the freedom which he desired. There were several bad features about this flight, which soon made themselves keenly felt as Tommy hurried on toward what he believed to be the next village. First of all, everything was heavy with rain. The grass through which he walked laced his feet in soggy tangles. Great drops fell from the overhanging branches of the tree. Then there was no light of any kind to guide him, for the moon was blotted out and the whole sky was heavy with huge clouds. But Tommy went on. He would continue, if he possibly could, until the first streaks of dawn. Then he would rest. After he had walked for more than an hour, Tommy found himself at the shore of another lake. He stood for a long moment, trying to decide which way to go. A dog barked at a distance, and he listened intently, trying to discover exactly whence the sound came. Then he made out the black outline of a house some 50 yards up the hill ahead, which caused him to change his course. Turning around, he made off through the woods. Soon he came to an old-fashioned rail fence which he believed to be the property line between two estates. He followed it until it made a turn to the right. Then he paused. As far as he could see there were no houses. He was glad of that. When fatigue finally got the better of Tommy, he looked about for a place to sleep. Some spot must be found where he would not be discovered by anyone. He knew that as soon as Kensington missed him, he would call the sheriff again, and the search would begin. Suddenly the moon crept out from between the clouds. Tom looked at his watch. It was just 10 minutes past 1. At first he thought it might be better to go on for a while, since traveling would be easier now in the moonlight. But he was too tired. Some distance ahead he noticed a few boulders around which stood evergreen trees, their branches dragging on the ground. Under them he would find a place to sleep. At once he made his way toward the trees. Getting down on his hands and knees, he crawled under them, happy to find that the ground there was dry and covered with fallen needles. He stretched himself out, and before he had time to finish the first Hail Mary, he was sound asleep. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Adrift. The night, tired out by her own fury, sleeps quietly at last. The insects, again dry of wing, are busy tuning up for the nocturnal symphony. The silver curtains of cloud part, and the powerful spotlight of the moon casts its silver rays down upon the sleeping hero of this drama. But he is totally unconscious of all that is going on. Others are at work on the plot in which he is an actor, but he is too tired to be interested. And so the night passes. When Tommy awoke it was almost 10 o'clock. So tired was he still, even after his deep slumbers, that he had no desire to get up from his comfortable bed of pine needles. He enjoyed the sense of freedom and security. No one would find him here, and as long as he stayed comfortably hidden, no sheriff would find him unless he had bloodhounds to help. To venture out into the open, on the other hand, would be dangerous, for he had not the least idea how close he might be to one of the many luxurious cottages around the lake area. Very close to him, but eyeing him suspiciously, a mother groundhog was feeding her young. It was the first time Tommy had seen a wild animal thus engaged in her domestic duties. It fascinated him. He did not want to move for fear of frightening her away. The sight of the animals took away from him, for the time being, that sense of loneliness which he had felt since Crawford left him for his trip to New York. If only Crawford were here now, his fertile mind would devise some way out of the present situation. Crawford always seemed to know just what to do. Tommy often wondered where his pal had learned so much. Another phase of Tommy's problem soon declared itself. There was a void in his stomach which was making itself felt very keenly. Hitherto he had given no thought to food, but now it forced itself on his attention. Where was he to get anything to eat here in the woods? To go to one of the summer homes would be dangerous. That had led to his and Crawford's being caught the first time they tried to escape. No, he must keep as far as possible from the houses. He did not want to be taken back to the school jail a second time, for it would mean not only disappointment but solitary confinement. That was the greatest punishment Kensington ever allowed. No boy was ever punished physically. Finally Tommy decided to crawl out from his hiding place and see what the country looked like. This he did very cautiously, gradually raising himself to his feet. He listened attentively for any token of another human being near, but no sounds reached his ears except those of the birds and insects. There was not a house in sight. In all directions spread only the fields and the woods. He hoped he was far away from the villa, but he had no means of knowing. Everything around was completely strange to him. For about an hour Tommy tramped on in what he believed to be the direction of Cliffville. Suddenly in the distance arose the gable of a house, the rest of the building being hidden among the trees. Was it perhaps the one near which he had been caught by the sheriff before? At once Tommy turned to the right, widening his distance from the house for the sake of safety. He increased his speed also, so if anyone had noticed him he would have a difficult time to catch up with him. Tommy now observed that the trees were not nearly so dense as they had been an hour before, and soon the woods ended altogether. He paused a moment to look around. There was still neither person nor house to be seen, but there was something that attracted his attention. Not 100 yards from where he stood he saw an orchard. Perhaps he could find something to eat there. It was now nearly noon, and he had taken no food since about 6 o'clock the night before. Why had he not been a little more thoughtful before he left the villa? He could have gone down to the kitchen and taken something to eat along with him. Perhaps old Bill would have packed him a lunch. Bill was that way. He knew that the boys who were to spend the summer at the villa would much rather be somewhere else. He also sympathized with them, though for the sake of his job he kept his ideas to himself. Nearing the orchard his speed increased. Already he could see the apples shining in the sun. At last here was something to eat. He reached up, picked one of the largest he could see, and quickly bit into it. But it was hard and sour. It was too early for apples. Tommy sat down upon some rocks to try to conquer his disappointment and to figure out what his next move should be. The stones were so delightfully warm beneath him that he decided to pull off his shirt and take a sun bath. The hot rays felt good upon his back. Then he spread out his arms somewhat toward the rear so as to brace his body while he leaned back, to let the sun strike straight on his chest. Spreading his hands thus, he felt something cool and quick moving beneath the fingers of his right hand. He automatically jerked it away, but not before the snake had bitten him in the web-like piece of flesh between the thumb and index finger. Alarmed, Tommy jumped to his feet. What should he do? At once his first aid lessons came to his mind. He looked carefully over the area where he expected to find the fang marks, squeezing the flesh so as to make the blood come through. After a brief moment he found the spot, a tiny red puncture filled with blood. He put it to his mouth to suck out the poison. The next thing that came to Tommy's mind was to try to locate the reptile to learn whether or not it belonged to a dangerous species. But there was no snake to be found, and soon Tommy was telling himself that after all he did not know one snake from another. Once again, after the first fright of the accident wore off, Tommy began to feel the gnawing in his stomach. He must soon find something to eat or take the other alternative, go to one of the cottages and run the chance of being caught and return to the villa. He made up his mind that he would continue his search of the village at which the train had stopped when he first came to the villa. Strange that he could not find the road he and Crawford had taken the night they were caught. He remembered that Crawford had told him that there was but one road to the town, but where was it? If he could only get to the town, he felt sure he'd be able to get something to eat. Someone would help him. People would surely not refuse to give a bite to eat to a harmless boy. More than once he had seen his mother distribute dainties to children of the neighborhood. Mothers were that way, he knew. On he went, until he saw another lake in the distance. Could it be that he was walking around in a large circle and coming out at the same place where he had passed the night? That indeed would be a tragedy. He did not know in what direction from the villa the town lay, so he could not use the sun for a guide. Once again his mind drifted away to Crawford, the pal who always knew the way out. But it was useless to think of Crawford now. Hundreds of miles of land and water separated them. And now a strange dizziness began to come over him. He could not remember ever having felt that way before. But dizziness or no dizziness, he could not stop his search now. He must get a glimpse of a house. If he could only find the one he had seen last night, he might be able to get his bearings. Gradually Tommy began to feel sick to his stomach. Why should that be, he wondered feebly, since his stomach had nothing in it? And these hot and cold spells. He tried to make himself believe they were due to the lack of food. But why that strange blur before his eyes? Of a sudden his foot caught in the root of a tree. He tried very hard to keep from falling, but he had been walking too fast to check suddenly, and he fell to his full length upon the ground. For a brief moment he lay there stunned. Then, overcome once more by the need for haste, he got up, brushed the dirt from his coat, and started on toward the shimmering waters again. How deceptive the distance was! Another 15 minutes brought Tommy to the water's edge. There he looked for the house in vain. Only trees stretched in all directions as far as he could see. Ought he retrace his steps to the orchard? Surely somewhere near it he would be able to find a house. The orchard at least was a sign of civilization. Strange he had not thought of that at the time he was there. But Tommy made up his mind he would not go back. That would be to lose precious time. By now Basil Kensington would have the sheriff on the case. With the principal's determination to let nothing happen that would bring the school into the news in an unfavorable light, he would spare nothing to have the boy found and returned. Tommy knew that if he succeeded in getting out of the state, it would be necessary for Kensington to get the G-men on the case, and then it would be impossible to keep the affair out of the paper. And what would his father do? With his fiery temper, would he not denounce both Kensington and the school for carelessness? Perhaps he would even take Tommy farther away from his mother. Once before he had suggested to the boy that he was forming plans to send him to Europe for his higher education. This might make him pack Tommy abroad now, even before he was ready for college. The pain in Tommy's temples brought his thoughts back to reality. Why had he this dreadful feeling? He had been hot and extremely tired before in his life, but he had never experienced symptoms like these. About half a mile down the beach, Tommy thought he saw something which looked like a pier built out into the water. Perhaps it would be best to go in that direction. It might lead to a house where he could get food. He had about decided that it would be better to run the risk of discovery on the chance of falling in with someone who would befriend him than to spend another night out in the open, especially now that he was feeling so sick. Dear St. Joseph, you have helped me so often before. Help me now. What shall I do? For a moment Tommy stood stark still, viewing the vast expanse apparently so devoid of human beings. The loneliness was bewildering to him, and his bodily misery was now so great that he doubted whether it would be possible for him to feel any worse. Painfully he continued his journey in the direction of the pier. His head throbbed with fever, his legs were almost too weak to move, his vision was getting more and more indistinct. He plodded on, but now it seemed mere automatic motion. He had lost all interest in finding a house. The desire for companionship dropped from him. He might have been walking in his sleep. Then the climax came. Tommy could go no farther. No matter how much he feared to stop, no matter even if he were found by the sheriff and taken back to the school jail, he simply could not go on. He would have to find a shady spot somewhere where he could lie down to rest. Perhaps this weakness would pass off. A suitable spot presented itself, and Tommy slumped down almost in a coma. The sun was now wheeling rapidly toward the west. It would soon go down behind the trees, which lined the lake on the other side, and then would come the cool breeze of the evening for which his burning fever made him long. End of chapter 8. Nine of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. In a strange land. Tommy awoke to find himself in a clean, soft bed. His head, which before he had fallen off into that merciful sleep was as hot as an oven, was now partially covered by an ice pack. Where was he? He looked around in an endeavor to identify the room. Was he back in jail? No, everything was new to him, but he could tell by the sun's rays striking the porch outside his bedroom window that the time was morning. In spite of the ice pack, Tommy's head still throbbed when he moved it, and the pains in his stomach were almost as sharp as when he fell asleep the night before. They brought a groan from his lips. He made an effort to rise, and then for the first time he realized that he was not alone. A hand was placed upon his head, and the voice of a stranger gave command. "Lie still, my boy." Tommy jerked as if he had been stung. "Where am I?" he asked nervously.
Don't worry about that. How do you feel? Tell me, my boy. I'm a doctor."
"My head aches so, and so does my stomach. Can you give me something for my stomach?"
"What did you have to eat last?"
"Nothing all day, Doctor."
The doctor's eyes opened wide. "Nothing?" he exclaimed in amazement.
"And I got bitten by a snake," continued Tommy.
"Where?"
"On my right hand."
"Let me see it quickly."
Tommy pulled his hand from under the cover. "Oh, look, it's all swelled up, and my head aches so. Can't you give me something for that?"
"Yes, but tell me about the snake. Did you see it?"
"Not a real look. I tried to find it after it bit me, but I couldn't."
"Did you drink any water from the lake?"
"Not a drop, Doctor."
"Now just lie still there, my boy. What is your name?"
"Tommy."
"Fine. Just lie still, Tommy, until I can prepare some medicine for you."
"Am I in a hospital, Doctor?" asked Tommy uneasily.
"No, you're not in a hospital, but you should be. That's where I would like to take you. You will need good care for some time."
Tommy made no further effort to rise. Indeed, he was too sick to do so. But he was enough himself to be glad that he was in the care of a physician. He knew it would be impossible for him to continue his journey as long as he was sick, so the sooner he was made better, the sooner he could leave.
"Now take all of this, Tommy. You may find it quite warm, but you must get it inside you. You are really a sick boy. Now down with it. That's fine. It is hot, isn't it?"
"Yes, Doctor, it is, but it isn't so bad. I don't mind if it will help me get rid of these awful pains."
"I really think it will, Tommy. Now try to sleep again."
There was something in his voice which Tommy could not resist. It reminded him a little of his English teacher's, and he found its sound reassuring. No longer was he worried about his surroundings. He was certain he was not at the villa, and for the time being that was all that mattered. When he should be feeling better he would try to find out more about where he was. The doctor might even help him make his escape. Tommy went to sleep again almost as soon as he closed his eyes. That medicine the doctor had given him felt fiery indeed, but it also made him feel very drowsy. Tommy did not realize, as the doctor did, the seriousness of his case. An hour later he was awakened for a second dose of medicine, imperative for counteracting the poison in his system. "You had a good sleep, my boy," said the doctor as he poured it out. "That's splendid. Just what you need. Do you feel any better?" "My stomach doesn't ache quite so much, Doctor."
"Are you as hot as you were?"
"Not quite."
"That's good, Tommy. I'm glad to hear it. Now here's another kind of medicine. You'll find it isn't quite so hot as the first, but I hope it will make you feel even better."
"Doctor, was that medicine supposed to make me sleep?"
"No, my boy. You are sleepy from fever. Do you know how long you were laying out on the lake shore? Or could you tell me when you were bitten?"
"No, I don't know for sure how long I slept, but I think it was only since yesterday afternoon. How did I get in this house, Doctor?"
"Now don't be worrying about that. Try to sleep again. That is the best thing in the world for you. You are among friends and you need have no fears of any kind. Tomorrow, when your fever is down and the pains are not quite so bad as they are now, we will be able to discuss other things. For the time being I want you to sleep as much as you can."
"And when will I be able to have something to eat, Doctor? I'm not exactly hungry, but I was wondering when I could get another good meal."
"We'll see. It all depends on how quickly you respond to the medicine."
The house was entirely dark when Tommy woke again. Everything in the place was filled with the peace of night. Only the insects out in the fields could be heard. He felt much better. The pains had entirely left his stomach, and his mind was clearer than it had been for some time. He put his hand up to his head and realized, from the feel of the ice pack, that someone had been replenishing it from time to time while he slept. A cold breeze blew in through the open window. For a brief space Tommy lay there enjoying the comfort he now felt. Then he slipped off to sleep again. He opened his eyes a little after 8 the following morning.
He was feeling almost normal again when the doctor made his appearance in the bedroom. Not long afterward, the boy greeted him eagerly. "Good morning, Doctor." "Good morning, Tommy. My, you're awake early. How do you feel this morning?" "I feel much better, thank you. I've had a fine night's sleep. Only woke up once." "I'm glad to hear that. Let me take your temperature." In the moments that followed, Tommy got a good look at the doctor. He felt sure that he could like this man. There was something fatherly about him, a quality which he had found entirely wanting in Basil Kensington. "Well, Tommy, the fever is gone. Your temperature is right where it should be, and I'm sure that after a few days of rest here in bed, you will be feeling fine." "I feel as if I could eat something today, Doctor. Do you think I can?" "I will leave orders for your meals, and I will be back to see you in the morning. You are not to get up until then." The doctor departed, leaving Tommy a little disappointed, for he wanted to have a talk with him. He consoled himself, however, with the thought that someone was to bring him a breakfast, and he would perhaps find out from that person just where he was. He felt he would like to know the name of his host, and if he could, without giving himself away, find out how far he was from the villa. About 20 minutes later a man entered the room with a tray on which was a breakfast in keeping with the boy's condition. "Good morning, sir," said Tommy very pleasantly. "Not so loud. Good morning." When the waiter drew closer to him, Tommy, to his great surprise, recognized him as Charlie, the man who had taken him away from Lawson. As Tommy did not quite know what to say in reference to those past events, he replied instead to the man's last speech. "Why do you want me to talk in a whisper? Is someone sleeping?" "There is another sick person in the house, and we must be very quiet for his sake. Now, the doctor wants you to eat all of this, but to eat it very slowly. Be sure to follow his instructions. I am not going to stay here with you while you are eating." What the man had to say did not interest the young patient as much as his own speculations about him. "Isn't your name Charlie?" he asked. The man stared at him coldly. "Yes, my name is Charlie. What of it?" "Oh, I don't want to offend you," responded Tommy. "Who said you offended me?" Tommy was at a loss for an answer, but the waiter continued. "I wish you hadn't come here at all. When I first found you that night down by the lake, I had a good notion to let you lie there and die. I don't know why I ever brought you up here. You were just a nuisance." Tommy felt entirely crushed. "I'm sorry if I've been a bother to you, sir. I will leave just as soon as the doctor will let me." "Well, he'll let you get out of here very soon now. I will make it my business to get you back to the villa within a few days." "Please, sir, I don't want to go back to the villa. I hate that place. Where is my father? I've written to him several times, and he doesn't answer my letters. He never used to treat me like this." "Never mind where your father is. It is his wish that you stay at the villa until school starts again, and then you are to go back to the academy. Basil Kensington knows that, and I suppose he doesn't mail your letters. If you are complaining against the place, do you think he will let your complaints get out? He's not a fool." "But I don't like him." "Get busy now and eat your breakfast. I'll be back in a few minutes." Then Charlie was gone. For a long moment Tommy felt stunned. Then reason returned to him. It was plain that this man was not to be fooled with. So although the interview had robbed him of his desire to eat, Tommy determinedly began on his breakfast. If he would be successful in his attempt to escape, he must build up his strength. Experience had already taught him that the world is cruel when one has to make one's way alone. Tommy was still thinking about these things when the door opened and Charlie once more came toward the bed. "Don't be in any hurry, Tommy. I have been thinking this thing over since I left you. I don't believe you told me how you happened to be along the lake that night." "You didn't ask me, so I didn't think you were interested. But if you want to know, I'll tell you. I didn't like it at the villa. They put me in jail there for trying to run away, and when I got out, I made up my mind that I would run away for good." "And what do you think your father will say to that? No doubt Kensington has written to him about it by now." "I don't know what my father would think about it, and I really don't care. He hasn't treated me right. What did he take me away from my mother for? Is that any way to treat her?" I haven't anything to say about that, Tommy, but I can tell you this. You will have to go back to the villa. As a representative of your father, and as one who knows his ambitions for you, I can safely say that you must return. In a couple of days you will be able to travel, and I'll have to see to it that you get there. I'll take your tray up now. Try to get in as much sleep as you can. I'll see you later." Charlie withdrew at once, and a moment after the door closed. Tommy heard the key turn in the lock. It was a very unwelcome sound to him. He knew that he was in the care of one who could not be bribed to let him go. About 10 o'clock the following morning the doctor called again. "How are you this morning, Tommy?" "I'm feeling fine again, doctor. Do you think I can get up today?" "Are you in a hurry?" "No, but I don't want to be a burden. I understand there is someone else sick here, too." "Well, I think it wouldn't hurt you to get up for a while this afternoon," replied the doctor pleasantly. "I wouldn't stay up too long. You'll find you are pretty weak when you get on your feet. Fever pulls one down in a hurry, you know. I see no reason why you shouldn't gradually resume your regular meals. I won't have to come to see you any more. So good bye." Despite the friendly words and manner, Tommy could not help but notice how the doctor had passed over the fact that there was another patient in the house. He listened too to detect whether the door of his room would be locked after the doctor went out. It was not a loud sound, but Tommy heard it. A few minutes later he got out of his bed. He wanted to determine a few things for himself, and it did not take him long to do so. The first thing he found out was that the doctor's warning was true. He was weaker than he had thought. The next was that the windows were heavily screened so that he could not get out. The third was that the prospect from one of his windows was of a long lane cut through the trees, which otherwise were as thick as in a forest, straight on to a pier stretching out into the lake. As Tommy made his way back to bed, he could not but reflect that he had escaped from one jail only to get into another. Other thoughts weighed upon him also. How was it that this man Charlie was here? Who could the mysterious other patient be? These things disturbed his mind until he dropped off to sleep, overcome by the fatigue of his brief exercise. Dusk was already gathering when Charlie came into the room again. "Here's a good supper for you, Tommy," he began. "The doctor wants you to go back to the villa in the morning. He says he thinks you will get along better if you were there in the company of the others rather than here, and that I can drive you over tomorrow, though you'll have to take it easy when you get there. I may not get back to see you any more this evening. I'm very busy. If there's anything you really need, you can push the button on the side of your bed. I forgot to tell you about it before. Have a good night's sleep. I'll see you in the morning." Charlie left, and the key clicked in the lock once more. End of chapter 9. The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Voices in the Night. Long after the purple of evening had been swallowed up in the black of night, and the symphony of the insects had taken the place of the chorus of the birds in that peaceful country area, Tommy lay awake thinking. He had tried hard to sleep, but sleep would not come to him. The hours spent in bed during the last few days were telling on him. He was full of the restlessness which comes from a period of forced inactivity. Finally Tommy got up from his bed and walked across the room to the window which looked down the path to the lake. The bright moon, like a theater spotlight, cast long rays upon the earth. The footpath was clearly visible, and at a further distance the little wavelets could even be seen dancing under the moonbeams. It was a lovely sight to see, but wasn't it down near that very spot that Tommy's freedom had come to an end? That was the thought in his mind as he gazed. Suddenly across the path of silvery water a dark shadow passed. Even at that distance, and although he saw it for only a brief moment, Tommy was sure it was a man in a boat. For a full half hour the boy stood there in the moonlight. Then the peaceful sounds of the night made him feel a little drowsy, so he wandered back to his bed hoping to drop off to sleep. But there was to be no sleep for him. The only thing he could do was to lie there and wait. It was not very long before he thought he heard the sound of footsteps on the walk outside. He listened intently, and the sound of a slight knock came to his ears, as if someone were rapping on the door downstairs.
He got up and tiptoed over to the window again to see whether he could get a view of the visitor. But that was not possible. The roof of the porch obstructed his vision. After a brief pause there was another knock. Then Tommy heard the sound of someone walking around in the room beneath him, followed by the noise of a door being opened. Evidently the visitor had been expected. Tommy could tell that the two were exchanging words, although he could not make out what was being said. A moment later he heard a door being closed, followed, to his utter amazement, by the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs toward his room. Was he to be carried off in the night, or were they even going to go away with him? Tommy's heart beat violently, but he got back into bed very quietly for fear of being caught listening. But Tommy's excitement at that moment was for nothing, because the visitors passed the corridor and entered the room next to his. He could tell that by the sound of the electric switch and by the light shining on the trees outside. Then there came the sound of their conversation, blurred, unrecognizable words. Tommy's curiosity was aroused. He got up again and walked to the other side of the room where a window was open near the window of the other room. There he could understand much of what the two voices were saying. "So you think he's pretty bad off, do you?" "Yes, I'm sure of it." That was Charlie speaking. "How much time do you give him?" "Well, I can't exactly say. I'm not a medical man, you know. But by the looks of things." The voice lowered so that Tommy lost the purport of the words. Who was this person they were talking about? Was it the sick man in the house? The other voice rose. "How long has he been here?" "For nearly—" Why was it that Charlie's voice dropped off so at the end of his sentences? "You say he's got dough?" "Yes, he's worth plenty of money." "How many are in on this?" "Just the two of us. You're not getting cold feet, are you?" "No, I'm not. But I never care to get in on anything important like this when there are a lot connected with it. There's too much chance that someone will talk in his sleep, if you get what I mean." "I get it perfectly," replied Charlie. "I've thought of that too. But even with a second person you have a risk, you know." That insult was passed over entirely by the other speaker. "And are you sure there is no will?" "I'm positive. I've been with him for several years now. I've seen all his papers. You just leave that part to me." "Are there no heirs?" "Yes, there are, but we can take care of that." "I wish I could share your optimism." "Well, my friend, it's easy to see you're not a lawyer." "No, I'm not, and it has been a habit of mine to keep away from them whenever I can." "Well, I know the risk I'm taking. It's only a chance, as I said." "Well, Columbus took a chance," said voice number 2. "I don't mind taking one myself. I'm just trying to find out all I can. Here's a fine bottle of wine. Have a drink." That was all that Tommy could hear for some minutes, except now and then the sound of glasses. When their speech could be heard plainly again, he realized he had missed some of the intervening remarks. "You be here tomorrow night at about 10. Do you think you can make it?" It was Charlie's voice. "Yes, that's easy. Maybe by that time he'll have signed the will. I'll put a little more pressure on him. By that time, too, I'll have that kid away from here." "That'll be a good idea. What he don't know won't hurt him." "He's a bright kid, but he'll have to go some yet." "Does he know anything about this?" "Not a thing." "Swell. Now I'd better be going. I've got a few other things to do yet tonight. It is strange how things pack up on one." That seemed to be the end of the conversation, for immediately afterward Tommy heard them open the door and snap off the electric light, and soon they were making their way past his room and down the stairs. Meanwhile Tommy had tiptoed hurriedly to bed. He was afraid they might come to his room, and if they were to find him awake, well, he dreaded to think what might happen to him. He knew that they had been talking about him, but he could not figure out the other part of their conversation. If he only knew more about the sick man they referred to, here was a good job for some detective. In the midst of these thoughts he heard the opening of a door on the ground floor. Evidently the stranger was leaving. The boy could tell that the two men were below somewhere, but just where that door was he did not know, for he had been brought into the house while he was unconscious. So as not to miss anything that might be a help to him in working out the whole puzzling situation, Tommy got up again and went over to the window, looking down the path to the lake. From below he could hear the men again, although they were talking now in hoarse whispers.
You'll get him away tomorrow?" "Yes, or if I can't I'll call you. You'll be at the same place?" "The same place. I'll stay now that you think the thing is coming to a head. I was planning on getting away to New York." "Better let that wait. Stick by me and we'll get the money yet." "I'll be seeing you." Tommy kept his eyes riveted on the path which stretched out so bright in the moonlight. If the strange man took it, he might get a chance to see him. And the boy had begun to realize that it would be a good thing to be able to recognize Charlie's confederate. Of course there were plenty of ways of getting away without going down that particular path to the lake. One thing Tommy felt sure of, and that was that the man had come up to the house on foot. He had not heard a sound of an automobile. If this plot resolved itself into something of importance, Tommy felt sure he would be able to read about it in the papers, and certainly he could be of service to the law. Certainly the sick man in the house was the one they were speaking about. Just where that sick man's room was, Tommy did not know. It must be in a place quite removed from the room used by the plotters. Men getting ready, as these men seemed to be, to do some vile deed in which secrecy is all important, are not foolish enough to make their plans where they can be overheard by their victim. They had evidently not realized that the boy in the room next to them could also overhear. Tommy was glad that he had not been able to sleep, otherwise he would have missed all of this. Frightened as he felt, he was old enough to appreciate the thrill of having discovered a plot. For a full hour Tommy kept his eyes on the lane, but no sign of the man appeared. The lake, which before had been illuminated by the moon, seemed to be almost entirely in shadow now, so it was impossible to tell whether the canoe he had seen pass earlier in the night was the one which the visitor had used. No further sounds save those of the night insects disturbed the silence. Cool breezes came in across the lake. It was long after the time for a boy to be in bed, but the words of the plotters rang in Tommy's ears, keeping him awake. Some means of escape from this place must be found, and found with the least possible delay. Tomorrow it would perhaps be too late to get help for the sick man against his enemies. Out of bed again at the thought, Tommy began to search through the drawers of the cabinets for a tool of some sort that he might use to force open the screen on the window. That seemed to be the only possible means of getting out. It was a weary boy who, an hour later, dropped onto his bed after an entirely unsuccessful search. There was only one consoling thought. He had tried every means in his power to be of service to the unknown patient, threatened by what he did not know. Tommy was just about ready to drop off into sleep when a new thought came to him. Charlie had promised he would take him back to the villa on the following day. He would pay close attention to the route they took in getting back to the camp. It might be possible for him to get in touch with someone who could prevent the plotters from carrying out their design. He knew it would be of no use to mention the matter to Basil Kensington. That worthy would not do anything. His name might get into the papers, notoriety might come to the school, and that would not be a good thing. No, Kensington must not know anything about it. But there was old Bill Dolan. Bill might know the sheriff of the place, and the sheriff ought to be able to do something. These were Tommy's final resolutions before at last going off to sleep. Tomorrow he would work out his part in the counterplot. End of chapter 10. Of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Counterplot. In spite of Tommy's determination the night before to be wide awake early in the morning, nature would not be cheated, and he was lost in the soundest of sleep long after the sun had flooded his room. There was still a cool breeze blowing in through the windows, and the fresh quietness of the place was enough to prolong anyone's morning slumber. Then, too, the strain of the night before had taken its toll of the boy's energy. Tommy's face was its normal color once more. No longer were the cheeks crimson with the flush of fever. His thick black curly hair, which, through years of good home training and then by the compulsion of the school law, was always well combed, was now in a riot. The full sweep of his chest as it rose and fell bespoke the vigor of health which was naturally his. He had the fine athletic build which is the pride of the healthy young American boy. Just how long sleep would have held him might never be known.
Had not a wren, entirely ignorant of the fact that others were not such early birds, alighted on the window near his bed, and set up such a chatter regarding his domestic problems that it was impossible for Tommy to remain asleep. He looked about quickly, then reached for his watch. It was already 9 o'clock. He listened for sounds from below that would betray activity there, but everything was quiet. Then the happenings of the night before trooped back into his mind, and he resolved to sum up what he knew in as orderly a manner as possible. Someone was being held in the house in anticipation of the day of his death. That person had money, and up to the present time had made no will. The men who were in charge of him were determined to get what they could from him. There was the problem. But who was the sick man, and would Tommy be able to do anything to help him? At this point he heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs leading up to his room. A moment later the key turned in the lock, and Charlie entered. "How do you feel today?" "Just fine, sir." "You certainly are a sleeper." "I am really ashamed of myself, sir. I had planned to be up real early this morning." "Well, it's early enough. I have not been up very long myself. But get up now and dress, and as soon as you are ready come downstairs. We'll have breakfast together this morning." This time when Charlie left the room he did not lock the door after him, so Tommy knew that at last he was going to get to see more of this beautiful summer home. It did not take him long to wash and dress, and he soon opened the door of his room to step out into a spacious corridor which gave access to a broad flight of highly polished stairs. Heavy drapes covered the windows of the luxurious reception room into which the stairs descended. A beautiful electric chandelier illuminated the room with a mellow light. The moment Tommy reached the bottom of the stairs, a door opened and the voice of Charlie broke upon the silence. "This way, Tommy," he whispered. Tommy turned in the direction of the voice. "Don't forget to speak in low tones. My patient is still asleep." Tommy stepped into the dining room of this beautiful home. Everything spoke of wealth and comfort. There was a heavy velvet Brussels rug on the floor. Some large oil paintings of scenes and still life ornamented the walls above the rich, heavy paneling. The long drapes at the windows were drawn back, permitting the sun to brighten the room. The windows were open, and the cool morning air gave the last touch of pleasant freshness to the scene. The breakfast table was tastefully set. Indeed, one could not but think that a woman's hand was noticeable throughout the room, and yet no woman appeared. The coffee in the electric percolator gave off its delicious aroma. Pieces of crisp brown toast showed in the toaster, whose silver edges glittered pink from the heated coils within. A large glass bowl of different kinds of fruit stood in the center of the table, and at each of the two places set for breakfast steamed a bowl of oatmeal. Everything was there to make one be thankful for a good appetite. "Sit down there, Tommy." "Thank you, sir." There were long moments of silence. "Just because I told you to talk in a low voice, Tommy, is no reason why you should keep still altogether. Of course, everything is strange to you here." He ate for a moment thoughtfully. "You know, I can't quite figure out why it is that you are not satisfied with the Academy and the villa. I have known both of those places for a very long time. Kensington is an old friend of mine, and I have been over to the villa a lot of times." "Well, I just don't like it," replied Tom. "In the first place, when a fellow is born a Catholic, he wants to be able to go to church on Sundays at least. I have not been able to go since I left home." "I know, Tommy, but your father is not a Catholic. He never wanted you to be one either. You ought to try to see his point of view." "What church do you go to, sir?" "Me? Well, I don't go to any. I don't believe much in going to church." "Is that why you are a friend of my father's?" "Not entirely. Listen, Tommy, why do you think you must go to church on Sunday?" "When God the Father gave Moses the 10 Commandments, one of them was, 'Remember thou keep holy the Sabbath day.' When Christ came on this earth and founded His Church, He gave His apostles the power to make regulations to carry out His work. One of the regulations that was made was that Catholics must attend Mass on Sunday. That's the reason why I want to go. When I do that, I am doing what is pleasing to God." "I see. And you really believe that?" "Yes, sir." "That's very interesting. You know, Tommy, I don't know anything about these things. I never had any training in religion. Perhaps if I had, things would be different with me now."
Just then the telephone bell rang. The instrument was on a small table near at hand, and Charlie reached for it while he remained seated at the table. Without raising his voice above the rather hoarse whisper he had been using in talking to Tommy, he answered it. Tommy went on with his breakfast, pretending that he was not at all interested in the conversation, but in reality paying the very closest attention to it. "Yes. About the same. Yes, I can. Within a half hour. Well, I wouldn't worry about that. Nothing will interfere. I have someone taking care of all the correspondence. Yes, tell him to answer it. No, don't bother with that, for I'll take him back there today. Yes. I'll be seeing you." Only a single part of this one-sided and obscure conversation interested Tommy, and that was the sentence, "I'll take him back there today." He knew what that meant. Charlie again resumed his meal, eating for a while in silence. No doubt he was reviewing in his mind the things he had been talking about over the wire. Then he became once more aware of the boy sitting across from him. "How's the breakfast, Tommy?" "Just fine, sir." "Don't call me sir. Call me Charlie." "Okay, Charlie." "We haven't had much chance to become friends, I know, but I never like to hear one refer to me in any other way but as Charlie. I've been called that ever since I can remember anything." For a moment or two after that, Tommy believed that he might be able to learn to like the man who sat across from him. But his thoughts were soon taken up with other things: anxiety about the unseen invalid, and unhappiness at the prospect of returning to the villa. Charlie pushed his chair back a little from the table and seemed lost in thought. Then he turned to address Tommy, who by now had finished his breakfast. "I'm going to have to go away from here for a couple hours, Tommy. I had planned on taking you back to the villa the first thing this morning, but that's off until I return. You won't be afraid to stay here alone for a while, will you?" "No, Charlie, I'm not afraid." "That's fine. Now in here, Tommy," he continued, opening a new door, "is the library. Come in. You're a student and you'll love these books." Tommy stepped into a beautiful room whose walls were entirely surrounded with built-in bookcases. "I'll hurry off now, Tommy, but I'll be back at about noon. There are just a few things I will expect of you. I'll reduce them all to this: no matter who comes while I'm gone, you are not to let them in." Tommy noticed that Charlie's eyes were now hard, and if a while ago he had felt he could be friends with this man, the thought was far from him now. "But how will I know when you come back? You are going in your auto, aren't you?" "I'll give 3 short honks on my horn. That will be a signal for you. Until you hear that, don't even stand at the windows where anyone could see you. I'll be back in a couple of hours." Charlie put on his hat and left the house. Through the library window Tommy could see him go out to the garage, which was about 50 feet away. In a short time he heard the sound of the motor, and before long the car passed entirely out of his view. Now Tommy was free to work out his plot. The books in the library did not interest him, for he had made up his mind to explore the house. He might be able to find the room in which the sick man was kept, and if he could do so, he ought certainly to discover other things of interest also. 2 of the rooms besides those he had been in on the first floor were locked. He knocked on their doors, but got no response. Then he went upstairs. The door of the room in which he had slept was ajar, just as he had left it, but the 3 other doors on that floor were locked. He heard not a sound as, after knocking, he listened carefully at each of them. Where could the sick man be? Was he so sound asleep that he did not hear, or was he too sick to respond? Tommy went downstairs again and out to explore the garage, whose door Charlie had left open. He found that it was very roomy and built entirely of thick logs and stone on the same plan as that of the house. However, to his surprise, there were no windows in it. Then he reflected that, while the absence of windows would have been rather unusual in a city garage, out here in the country, where people use their places only in the summer months, it might be quite natural to have it built thus. For instance, it would remove from tramps and vandals the temptation to break windows. Tommy was very happy when he found that the walls of the garage were so solid. That was the first important thing in the plan that he was now making. He left the door standing open, just as he had found it, and after a look at the padlock, went back into the house. He would wait and trap Charlie. Now, for a time, he could give his attention to the splendid library.
He found many books that he had read, and hundreds more that he had never so much as heard of. He took down a volume of Poe's stories, and then went over to a large chair beside a reading table. There were many curious objects on the table, interesting little ivory figures carved in the minutest detail. It was plain that the owner of this place had a taste for fine Chinese and Japanese curios. After Tommy had examined them carefully, he sat down to read, but he found it difficult to keep his mind on the printed page. At last he put his book down. There were other things to examine in that spacious library. In one corner stood a beautifully hand-carved cabinet. He went over to it, opened one of the doors, and found that it contained numerous packs of playing cards. Examining some of them, he noticed that they too were of Japanese design, many of them entirely unfamiliar to him. No doubt they were part of the curio collection of the owner of the home. Near this cabinet Tommy found a radio. He turned the dial on it and waited, but no sound came out of it. Searching for the cause of its failure to function, he soon discovered that it was not even wired. It had never been used. That was a disappointment to him. It would have been a good method of whiling away some of the morning. He next found a stamp collection which immediately absorbed him, for he himself had begun a collection about a year ago. He took the heavy book and went over to the table again. He found among the stamps many specimens like those he himself had had back in his father's home. He wondered what had become of the things he had left behind him on the night he and his mother had made their escape. So much had happened since then. Would he ever go back to that home? Tommy looked at his watch. More than an hour had passed since Charlie left. Where had he gone? Charlie was a strange creature. Perhaps he had not gone very far at all. He might only be trying Tommy out to see what he would do. These thoughts made Tommy lose interest in the stamps. He was closing up the big book when his sleeve caught on the knob of a drawer in the table, a drawer not entirely closed. Tommy took hold of both of the knobs and pulled. The drawer came out, revealing to his gaze 2 revolvers. Here was something interesting and very appropriate to his plan. How quickly that thought came to him! Here were 2 well-kept weapons, and both of them were loaded. Tommy had had little experience in the use of revolvers, but he had owned a rifle and knew how to handle it. He would take a chance. Charlie must be caught some way. Then it all came to him clearly. He would wait in the house near the window which gave a view of the drive down which Charlie had gone that morning. As soon as he heard the signal Charlie had promised, he would come out on the porch. Such an action would be perfectly correct, for he had been given no order to stay in the house when Charlie came back. But there were other things to consider. If Charlie stopped his car near the front of the house, nothing could be done to capture him, and in that case Tommy might be caught with a revolver. "He can't do anything to me if he does catch me with it," Tommy said to himself. Suddenly the boy heard the sound of the returning automobile. He quickly pushed the revolver into his pocket, shoving his coat around to conceal the part of the weapon that projected. As the car drew near he heard the signal agreed on and hurried to the door. After the car had gone by on its way to the garage, Tommy opened the door and went out onto the porch to watch. To his delight, he observed that Charlie was going to drive right into the garage without stopping. That was just what he wanted. He ran as fast as he could, seized the garage door in his hands, pushed it into its place, and before Charlie could realize what was happening, had the door padlocked securely, with Charlie on the inside and himself on the outside. Now some fast work had to be done. Tommy hurried back into the house, got the telephone directory, and called the chief of police in the town. "Bring several policemen with you and come as fast as you can. There's a man here, locked up in a garage. He's been planning to rob someone. I can't tell you all about it now, but you will find plenty when you get here. I'm all alone here, Chief, so don't keep me waiting." End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tommy the Detective. The hours which Tommy Blake had spent at the bottom of a pit in the mountain, he told the friends who rescued him, had seemed the longest of his life. But they were short compared with the time that intervened between his telephone call and the arrival of the police. He felt all the strain and tension of these exciting and dangerous events, and in addition,
He feared his captive might know a secret way of getting out of the garage. Of course, Tommy still had the loaded revolver, but might not Charlie also have one with him? Would a man who was planning some form of robbery, as certainly seemed to be the case, ever be without firearms? And would Tommy be able to hold his own against such a man if he got out and if he did have a gun? Tommy took up his post near one of the windows where he could watch the door of the garage. As he stood there, rigid with excitement, he heard the prolonged sound of someone coughing. The noise seemed quite remote. Was it from the room of the sick man? And where could that room be? For a moment Tommy was tempted to leave his place at the window and try to trace the sound to its source, but prudence won. There was nothing he could do for the man, even if he should find him, whereas it was necessary that he remain on the alert in case the unexpected happened. Now his ear was arrested by another sound, this time the noise of an automobile. Tommy got up and assured himself that all the house doors were locked. He was taking no chances. How could he tell who was in the car which he could now see making its way down the path toward the house? He could only hope that it did not belong to any of Charlie's friends. It was a tense moment. The car came to a standstill near the front entrance. Tommy looked cautiously through the curtains. He saw the door open, and out stepped a policeman, followed by 2 others. What relief! Now everything would work out well. Tommy hurriedly unlocked the door and called to the first officer. "This way, sir. Come right in. Hurry." "What's going on here, son? Why all the excitement?" "It's a long story, Chief. Will you please come in here? I want to talk it over with you." The Chief and his 2 assistants entered, while Tommy, hardly pausing for breath, plunged into his recital. "There is a robbery of some kind happening here, and I called you to help me." "What is your name, my boy?" "I'm Thomas Blake, Jr." "Is this your home?" "No, sir. I was brought here. My home is in New York, but I have been living at the Villa, the summer camp of Washington Irving Academy. I got knocked out from snakebite, and I was brought here. Now, sir, the reason I called you is that I have discovered a plot. There is a man living here who is known to me only as Charlie. Last night he had a visitor here, and from the conversation which I overheard, they are planning to cheat someone out of his money. I heard Charlie say there was a sick man here in this house, and that he had made no will, and that if the 2 would stick together they would get his money. That sick man, Chief, is in one of the rooms on this floor, but his room is locked." "Have you the keys to the doors, Tommy?" "No, sir, but we may be able to get them. At present I have this man Charlie locked up out there in the garage. He has the keys to the house." "You mean to tell me you have someone locked up in the garage?" "Yes, sir." "How did you get him locked in?" "Oh, that was easy. He just drove in as usual. Then I ran and closed the door and locked it." "This is a very serious charge, my boy. Are you sure that there is such a plot as you describe? You know, if we arrest this man and he turns out to be innocent, we'll hear about it." "But if you don't arrest him, sir, innocent people will suffer. My father is a very rich man, Chief, and if you get into any trouble, I am sure he will help you. We can keep the whole thing quiet." "How can you keep it quiet?" "My father can do that. He knows how. He's done it before." "Where's your father, Tommy?" "I don't know where he is at present. He travels a great deal, but we can always contact him through his New York office." "So you have the man trapped in the garage?" "Yes, he's there all right, and he can't get out till we let him out." "Well, the first thing to do is just that. Get him out of the garage. Do you think he carries a gun?" "I don't know, Chief. I found this and one other revolver in the drawer of the library table. They may be his, or they may belong to the sick man. I don't know." "How long has he been in there?" "Since just before I called you, Chief." "Were you ever in the garage, Tommy?" "Yes, sir. I went in there a little while after Charlie went away. That was when I got the idea of trapping him." "Well, we won't have to worry about the gun, Chief," put in one of the policemen who was standing looking out of the window at the garage. "Are there any windows in the building, Tommy? I don't see any from here." "No, sir, not one. That was a good thing for me. I would never have locked that fellow in otherwise. It would have been too dangerous. If he had had a revolver with him, he might have shot me through the window. I wouldn't trust him far. A man who would take advantage of a fellow too sick to help himself can't be trusted with anything." "You're right there, my boy. "Well then, Chief," broke in one of the policemen excitedly, "all we have to do is go out there, unlock the door, open it just wide enough, and tell him to put his arms out through the opening. We can put the cuffs on him and then bring him out. He will not be able to do anyone any harm. We can then question him all we want. If we feel he is innocent, we need go no further. If we feel otherwise, we can make him open the room and let us see the sick man the boy speaks about. All of that is within the law." "You're right," assented the Chief. "Let's go on out. And Tommy," turning to the boy, "you come along with us. I want you to see everything that goes on here. This is really your case, you know." "Yes, sir. I want to see everything. I might have to go to court about it." "We'll find the sick man later." Without further delays, the three officers and Tommy made their way to the garage. The man within had the key, and it was necessary to break the padlock to get the door open. "This is the Chief of Police and 2 officers of the law," shouted the Chief as soon as the lock fell off and before the door was opened. "We don't want any serious trouble with you, sir, but we must insist that you push your hands out through the door when we open it wide enough for that. If you do as I say, we can get this business over within a few minutes." "Okay, Chief," came the surly voice from within, and immediately the hands and arms of the captive protruded through the narrow aperture. "I'm going to put the cuffs on you for the time being." The Chief at once clapped the irons on the extended wrists, then getting a firm grip on them, he gave the men orders to open the door and let the man out. "If the story we have heard is not true, sir, we will let you go as soon as we have checked. Come along with us to the house." Tommy noticed that Charlie did not look at him as they moved along toward the house. "You say his name is Charlie?" one of the policemen asked Tommy, as they walked along at some distance behind the Chief. "Yes, that's the only name I know him by." "Have you ever met him before?" "Yes, he was working for my father the last time I met him." "Well, come along in, Tommy. We want you to hear what he'll have to say. I hope you have not called us here to arrest an innocent man." Once they were within the house again, the Chief examined the captive to be sure that he had no weapons concealed upon his person. Then, being satisfied on this point, the Chief faced Charlie squarely. "Is this your house?" "No, it is not." "Do you live here?" "Yes." "The boy tells me that you have a sick man locked up in this house. Is that true?" "Yes, it is." Charlie looked coldly at the Chief. "Is he being detained here against his will?" "Yes." "Are you personally responsible for his being here, or are you an agent for someone else?" "I am personally responsible for his being locked up here, but he came here of his own volition." "Is this his house?" "Yes." "Is the key to his room on that ring in your pocket?" "Yes." The policeman took the key ring out of Charlie's pocket. "What number is on the key to the room?" 29. "Here, Sergeant, take this key. Now, sir, which is room 29? "The second on the left." "Open it, Sergeant." The officer unlocked the door and opened it. Evidently all the curtains in the room were drawn, for the place was very dark. The sergeant located the electric switch and flooded the room with light. There on a bed lay the emaciated form of a man, his hair long and matted, his face covered with a straggly beard. That he was in very critical condition anyone could tell at a glance. He scarcely moved when the light was turned on. "Don't let the boy in there, Chief. Don't let the boy in there." Charlie made an effort to prevent Tommy from going in. "Why not?" "Don't let him in, I tell you." The policeman tightened his grip on his captive so as to be sure he would not get away. "Don't!" There was something strange about the way Charlie shouted at the Chief. "Tommy must be a witness to whatever is said and done here. When this case comes into court, he must know everything about it." Charlie leaned up close to the Chief and whispered something into his ear. To Tommy's watching eyes, the Chief's face seemed to turn pale, and for a long moment he stood perfectly still. "Tommy," he said at last, "would you mind not going into that room for a few moments? I want to see how conditions are in there first. Perhaps it would be better for you not to see this. If everything is satisfactory, I will call you in. Wait here." "Sure, Chief. That's all right with me." Then, turning to the other officer who stood near him, the Chief said, Hold this man, Jim. I want to take a look at that room." The officer took Charlie's two elbows into a very brawny grip, and the Chief disappeared into the room where the sick man lay. "Why don't you want me to go in there, Charlie?" But Charlie only stared at the floor, leaving Tommy to wonder why it was that he did not want him to see the sick man. End of chapter 12. Of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Great Discovery. Whatever it was that Charlie had told the Chief of Police, it did not keep him from letting Tommy enter the mysterious room. It seemed but a minute after he had bidden the boy to wait outside that he reappeared in the doorway. "Come in, Tommy. There's nothing in here that will hurt you." Tom entered rather cautiously and surveyed the room. There on the bed lay a sick man. His condition was pitiable in the extreme. His breathing was short and labored. His eyes were partly closed, and save for the two reddish spots on his cheekbones, his face was the color of the pillow. It was very evident that he was suffering not only from his diseased lungs, but from lack of care. "Are you well cared for here?" asked the Chief, thinking it the best way to open conversation, though he could see the answer to the question even as he asked it. The reply was a negative shake of the head. "Do you have a doctor coming here?" Again the sick man shook his head. "Do you know the man who has locked you up here?" This time the patient made an affirmative motion. "What is your name, sir?" At that question the man motioned feebly toward a little table beside his bed on which was a pile of papers. The policeman picked up the top piece and read out loud: "To whom it may concern, I, Thomas Blake Sr., being of sound mind." "What name did you say, Chief?" questioned Tommy with a stunned look. "Thomas Blake Sr." "That's my father's name, Chief. Is this my father? Dad didn't look like that. Chief, do you really think this is my father?" Now the eyes of the sick man grew large. He made a great effort to rise, only to be forced back again in a fit of violent coughing. "Do lie still, sir. You are overtaxing your strength. Sergeant, call a doctor at once." Tommy came closer to look at the form on the bed. It was true. Through the beard and matted hair he made out the features of his father. He fell on his knees, put his arm around his father's head, and choking with tears got out one word: "Dad." The sick man dragged his arm up around Tommy's body, and with the little strength he possessed he pressed it to him. "Tommy." The Chief drew away. There was a mist in his eyes. He took off his hat, walked over to a window, and pulled up the shade. After he had himself under control again, he came back to the bed. "Tommy," he said, "you had better not tire your father too much. Come, get up now. We must try to make him comfortable." Tommy did as he was told. He stood up, his face burning in his own tears. Time and circumstances had not crushed in him the natural love of a boy for his father. The Chief began to straighten up the bedclothes and the pillows in an effort to add a little to the patient's comfort. Suddenly he heard a whisper: "Call a lawyer for me. I must make a will." Then Blake's eyes closed. He seemed exhausted. There was no time to be lost. The Chief hurried to the phone and put through the call as requested. "We must keep this will, Tommy. It will be needed when Charlie comes up for his medicine. We'll get everything ready here so the lawyer can begin his work as soon as he arrives." "There comes an auto," whispered Tommy. "I'll go out and see who it is. No one must enter except the doctor and the lawyer." In a short time the Chief came back into the room with the doctor. It was not the one who had cared for Tommy when he was sick. "See what you can make of this case, Doctor," said the Chief as he brought the physician up to the bed. The doctor looked at the sick man for a moment and his face became very grave. As he observed the expression, Tommy's heart sank. The doctor went over the sick man's chest carefully with his stethoscope, asked a few brief quiet questions, and then beckoned for the Chief to come with him into the adjoining room, out of the hearing of father and son. "There's very little that can be done, Chief. This man has had a bad case of pneumonia some time ago, and I imagine he wasn't careful enough afterward. He now has what is commonly called galloping consumption. I wouldn't give him more than a very short time to live. His heart action is extremely poor. If there is a will to be made, he had better have it attended to instantly. He's liable to die any time now. Do you know him, or how did you come to be here?" "I was sent for, Doctor. The boy in there is the sick man's son. It's only by the purest accident that I am here. But just a minute, Doctor. I hear another auto. Wait for me, please." With that the Chief stepped to the door a moment before the lawyer would have rung the bell. "Come in, Mr. Ward." "Dr. Ridgway, I want you to meet Mr. Ward, a friend of mine. He has come to help Mr. Blake make his will." "I'll be glad to have you as a witness in this case, Doctor, if you are not too busy." "I shall be glad to help you." The Chief then took the two professional men into the sick room. "Mr. Blake, here is Mr. Ward, the lawyer." Blake's eyes opened wide now. "Take down my story, Mr. Ward. You three men and Tommy will be my witnesses. I am Thomas Blake, Sr., of 3965 Milton Boulevard, New York. I married Miss Louise Bowman. This boy here is our son, Thomas. I was born and am an atheist. My wife Louise is a Catholic. To satisfy her, Tommy was baptized and raised a Catholic. We often quarreled over this. Finally, she left me and took the boy with her. My detectives located her and got the boy for me without her knowledge. I put Tommy in the Washington Irving Academy to be educated. Late last January I contracted pneumonia. When I got well enough to travel, Charles Bates, who is my secretary, brought me here. At first I seemed to improve, but only for a few days. When I got worse and had to go to bed, he soon neglected me, though he lived here in the house. A couple of days ago he brought me that will to sign. I could not read it all, but I know he is trying to get my money." That part of the story being told, Blake dropped back into the pillow as if dead. The doctor quickly took his pulse. "He's very weak. We must let him rest for a while," he whispered to Mr. Ward. "That story seems simple to us, but took great effort for him to tell. He will rally again soon. He is living on his willpower now." The men remained quiet for a time, waiting for the patient to begin again. After a few minutes Mr. Blake's eyes unclosed. "We must continue. All documents pertaining to my estate are in my vault in Bank. No one else knows they are there. It is my will that 1/3 of all my possessions be given to my wife. After all expenses are taken care of, Thomas, my son, is to be given all that remains. I hereby make my wife the legal guardian of my son and the administratrix of my estate. I only ask that she be not sent for until I am gone. Write the will quickly. I can't last long." "Now, don't think that way, sir. Keep up your courage for the sake of the boy." "He's a wonderful boy." "He is that, sir." "Too bad things didn't turn out better for us." Since the will was brief, it did not take Mr. Ward long to complete it. While he was working, the patient suddenly began to moan as if in pain. "Is Dad dying?" Tommy asked the doctor through his tears. "No, my boy," replied the man compassionately. "Your father is very weak, but he is not dying. Do not bother him now. He is resting." In a few minutes Mr. Ward had the will ready for the signature, and the doctor informed Mr. Blake of the fact. The sick man took the document and read it slowly and carefully. He then nodded his head, indicating that he was ready to sign it. The others, the doctor, the policeman, the lawyer, and Tommy, stood watching him, silently noting how much it cost him to move, yet unable to help. He rested a while and then spoke. "I want you to know, gentlemen," he said in tones firmer than they had yet heard from him, "that I am in full control of my faculties and that this is my true last will and testament to which I put my name." The lawyer handed him a pen. Blake took it in his white fingers and slowly signed his name. Then his hand dropped and the pen fell to the floor, while his closed eyes showed him to be oblivious to the scene around him. "Is Dad worse?"
whispered Tommy. "Your father is resting," replied the doctor. "Oh, Dad, can't you talk to me?" burst from the boy's lips. The shadow of a smile crossed the father's face as he whispered, "Yes, Tommy, I can." "I don't think it would be well for you to tire your dad," said the doctor, drawing Tommy gently away from the bed. "He needs to lie absolutely quiet for a few minutes. Later on you can talk to him. Chief, I'd call a nurse to take care of him if I were you." "Yes, we must get a nurse," put in Tommy eagerly. "And we must get Mother to come here." "Now, Tommy, remember what your father said." "Well, call a nurse anyway. Right away. Do you know a very good one?" "Yes, I can get a specialist for him if you want me to." "Get the best you can and tell her to come quick." "Sergeant, you and Frank may take Charlie there to the police station and lock him up. I think we have more than enough on him." "Chief," put in Tommy, "I want you and the doctor to stay here with me." "I'll stay just as long as you want me to, Tommy," replied the doctor. But Tommy suddenly had a new idea. "Don't you think we could get an ambulance and take Dad to a hospital?" "No, Tommy. I think it is best to leave him here for the present." The two officers took Charlie with them, and Tommy, leaving the Chief and the doctor with his father, went upstairs to his room for a few moments to figure out what to do. He was not going to let his father die without making a serious effort to convert him. End of chapter 13. Of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Great Adventure. Alone in his room, Tommy knelt down to ask the help of good St. Joseph in this great battle for his father's soul. St. Joseph had become his special patron, largely because of the teaching of his mother. She had often told him that this great saint had always answered her prayers. So when the boy rose from his knees, he felt confident that he would win. Quietly he made his way down the stairs and into his father's room. "Would you gentlemen be so kind as to leave the room so I can speak to my father in private?" There was so much dignity in the boy's words and actions that the doctor and chief of police could not but admire him. They yielded to his request and withdrew, closing the door behind them. "Dad, I want to talk to you. Are you awake?" "Yes, Tommy. What is it?" "Won't you allow me to get a priest for you so you can become a Catholic before you die?" "No, Tommy. I'm all right." "But you are very sick, Dad, and you have never been baptized. Everybody has to be baptized. If you would let me get a priest for you, he could baptize you. Then all your sins would be forgiven and you could go straight to heaven." "That's some of the stuff you learn in the Catholic school, isn't it? I don't believe in such things." "But the Bible says we must be baptized, Dad. Don't you believe in the Bible?" "I never read the Bible." "You are not answering my question, Dad. Haven't you ever heard it said that the Bible tells us we have to be baptized?" "Don't bother me about that. Don't you see how weak I am?" "Yes, I do, and that is the reason why I am so anxious to have you baptized. Until you are baptized you are not a Christian, and when one has had the chance to know the truth as you have, he cannot be saved unless he becomes a Christian, unless he wants to do what Christ once done. You always tried to make me believe you loved me, Daddy." "I do love you, Tommy." "Well, you wouldn't want to be separated from me forever then, would you?" "No." "But you will be if you don't do what is right." "God loves you, Dad. Jesus came down to this earth, suffered and died for you because He wanted you to be saved. You believe that, don't you?" "But, Tommy, doesn't God love us all?" "God loves those who do what they know He wants them to do. God wants you to be baptized. You know He does. You believe that, don't you?" There was a long pause. The patient lay as still as death. Tommy stared at his father's face. "Won't you answer me, Dad?" he pleaded, the tears now rolling down his cheeks. "Yes, I do believe it, but it's too late now."
No, it isn't. Won't you please let me call for a priest?" Again there was a pause. Tommy fell upon his knees and prayed aloud. "Dear God, won't you please make my dad want to become a Catholic? Please give him the grace so he can see how much you love him. I don't want him to die without being baptized. Please, dear God, please." Then Tommy broke down entirely. He could say no more. His whole body shook as he sobbed out his boyish heart. A moment later he felt his father's cold hand upon his head. He looked up quickly. "Tommy?" "Yes, Dad." "I'm ready. Call the priest." Tommy waited no longer. He sprang to his feet, dashed open the door, and shouted to the Chief: "Chief, will you call the nearest priest for Dad? Tell him to come as fast as he can. Dr. Ridgway, are you a Catholic?" "Yes, Tommy. What can I do for you?" "Would you go to your home and get some blessed candles and the other things necessary for a sick call?" "I'll be glad to do that." The doctor did not wait a moment. He hurried into his car and sped as fast as he could. Tommy then returned to his father, who seemed more at ease. "Dad." "Yes, my boy." "Will you tell me where Mother is?" 926 Zixel Street, New York. "Will you let me send a wire for her to come to us?" "It will be too late, Tommy." "Oh, don't talk that way, please. You won't mind if she comes, will you?" "No." Once again Tommy hastened out to the Chief. "I'm having an awful time getting the priest, Tommy. The operator says the line is busy. I'm trying every couple of minutes." "While you're waiting, Chief, will you please send a telegram to Mrs. Louise Blake, 926 Zixel Street, New York? Tell her about Dad and ask her to come on at once. Say that he wants her to come. Tell her he is going to become a Catholic. Oh, please hurry, and keep on trying for the priest." "Now, don't you be getting upset, Tommy. I'm not a Catholic, but I know that if God wants your father to be baptized, as you say, everything will work out. You go back to him now, and let me take care of these things." Those words gave Tommy the encouragement he so badly needed. "Thank you, Chief." Tommy hurried back to his father. At once he noticed there was something different about him. At first Tommy thought he was dead. Even the fever blotches were gone from his face. Then he noticed his father was reaching for something. "What do you want, Dad?" "Tommy, I'm leaving you. The priest won't get here in time. Baptize me yourself." "Tommy, thank you for saving my soul. Tell Mother I'll meet her in heaven." The end. End of chapter 14. Recording by Maria Therese. End of The Adventures of Tommy Blake by Brother Ernest Ryan.